across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good afternoon to you. Just after 1 o'clock on Friday, April the 18th, I'm David Bull in for Ian Collins. Well, coming up this hour, rapists can no longer identify as women under the Supreme Court's landmark ruling. But trans activists have vowed to defy the ruling, continuing to use single-sex toilets whilst claiming blatant discrimination. Meanwhile, Germany's top court has ruled that single, able-bodied male asylum seekers who travel to the country through Greece can now be returned there, marking a significant development in the handling of asylum cases. And British Steel executives have confirmed that British coal could be used to power their blast furnaces, bringing renewed attention to Energy Secretary Ed Miliband's decision to block plans for a new coal mine in Cumbria. Truly gobsmacking, that story. Get in touch this afternoon. You can call us 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well at talkTV. This, of course, is the home of common sense, so do please get in touch. Well, a very good afternoon to you. Really good to be back on this bank holiday Easter weekend. I hope you're enjoying yourselves, whatever you are doing. Hopefully the weather will improve over the bank holiday weekend. But anyway, make the most of it this afternoon. Well, I'm delighted that on Good Friday I'm joined by Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster. Good afternoon. Happy Easter to you.
Happy Easter to you.
Right, shall we start with the trans stuff? Because this is a really big ruling. This is in the Telegraph today. Britain's biggest bank has pledged solidarity with transgender staff after the Supreme Court ruling on the legal rights of women. Executives at Lloyds Bank, which counts 1 in 2 British adults as customers, have backed transgender staff working at the company, saying they would support them at this very tough time. I think all of us would agree with that. Look, the way that I see this is, thankfully, common sense has prevailed. We have a ruling from the Supreme Court. It goes basically with what most of us were saying, which is that clearly to be a woman, you have to be biologically a woman. That being said, if you are a trans woman, you need to feel loved and included and supported in your workplace environment. And so therefore, actually, despite the headline, I don't have a problem with what Lloyds Bank is saying. We can talk about what they've said in the past, but given the ruling, I think it's important that they reach out to their trans staff and say, look, this is a workplace which protects you.
Yeah, because I think that's the problem. I think that the way a lot of people are interpreting this ruling, they're saying it's cruel, but I don't think it's cruel. I think it's just bringing clarity, and I think that that clarity is really important. And I think that any society does need structure and it does need boundaries, and we use the law to do that. But I think that it's perfectly fine, like you say, for people to say that they still respect trans people, that this is not in any way trying to discriminate against trans people in any way. In fact, this ruling said that trans people are still protected by many aspects of the Equality Act. It's just that they had to make very, very clear that when it comes to women's rights, that has to be defined by biological sex. And I think that the reason we've sort of got to this point is there was a lot of activism that I think pushed against boundaries too far and was coming into conflict with so many important areas of life.
I've spoken about this a great deal on my Weekend Breakfast show, talking about this isn't a win, actually, for one group or the other. This is about protection of single-sex spaces for women, and particularly young women who felt under threat. We've seen ridiculous cases of trans women who are clearly still what we would say phenotypically male. They look like men, they identify as women, and they're in women's changing rooms. So what this law actually says is it gives guidance to big corporate organisations saying, this is now the law, you have to deal with it. And actually, from those people pushing back, saying, well, hang on a minute, where are trans women going to change? Well, clearly the onus now has to be on those companies and organisations to have single-sex cubicles so that you have something akin to a disabled toilet, for example, or disabled changing.
I know. It's so difficult. You know, we live in a very liberal, tolerant society, but then there is this issue, and I think maybe, you know, we're going to discuss it as well, like immigration, where at some point that a line does need to be drawn, and we need clarity and we need structure. And I actually think that makes us happier as a society. Then I think we will actually have less conflict, because then everything is just clear and we know where the boundaries are.
I think that's absolutely right. And I am with Lloyds, actually, where Andrew Walton, who's the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, posted on the intranet, that's the internal internet in the bank, saying, look, we are going to back the trans staff following the unsettling day. Of course it's unsettling for trans people. I get that. I absolutely get that. But it's now about providing structure and protection and making sure that every single person that works in those organisations feels that they are being looked after. There's something else that's quite interesting this afternoon, which is rapists can no longer claim to be women. Rapists will no longer be able to identify as women following the landmark ruling. And so, as we know, this is going to end that situation that we have seen, a ridiculous situation where the police forces weren't even recording the sex of the offender. They were going by their preferred pronouns or how they see themselves in terms of gender identity. Children being taught absolutely ridiculous things like there are 50, 60 different types of gender. I welcome the ruling. I think now it's going to streamline the process. It gives guidance to all those bodies, whether it's the police, the NHS. By the way, the NHS has a lot of work to do on this particular area. So I think it provides clarity.
It does, because actually when you sort of have a free-for-all like that, it can become very unsettling, and it is very unsettling to read about someone who's committed a terrible crime. It's clearly a male, yet they're consistently being referred to as she. I mean, that is just a distortion of reality, and that is not good for people. That actually makes people feel very unsettled in society, and that reality is not being recognized. I mean, I wrote an article a long time ago saying that I didn't agree with using the phrase her penis. I felt it was completely illogical to talk like that.
It's biologically false. It's nonsense.
Yes, absolutely. And reality matters. We do actually have to acknowledge reality. I'm not saying that, we have to live in a super conservative society where there's no self-expression and that there's, that everyone has to conform to very strict gender norms. No, we're not saying that at all. But there are always limits to everything, and you have to recognize those limits. And I think that, for many of the women behind the Supreme Court case, they are doing this, and I think in the most humanitarian way possible.
I just want to go back to Lloyds, because if you remember, there was kind of this prevailing mass delusion that went on at the time. So when Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister, said, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, that is common sense. Well, Sarah Underhill, who was the Human Resources Director at Lloyds at that point, said she's appalled to hear the rhetoric coming from the Conservative Party conference, saying it's targeting the trans and non-binary community. No, it isn't. It's stating biological fact. A man is a man because of their chromosomal makeup, and a woman is a woman because of the chromosomal makeup.
Absolutely. I don't know when this very radical idea of gender suddenly took hold. I really don't. But what happened was it became like dogma, and then people became very, very afraid of just simply stating the truth, what had been common sense up until now. And that is wrong. And I think a lot of that has to do with the activists trying to silence people on social media. I think, sadly, as many people have pointed out, you have an organization like Stonewall that began pushing a very radical idea of gender, getting involved with corporations. Then those corporations would impose it upon their staff. I don't think, maybe for people who were on the very radical fringe, they felt like they were able to express themselves. But I think that everybody else in the society felt like if they tried to state what was for centuries just pure biological fact, they were then smeared as bigots.
I want to talk about that later, actually, about Stonewall, because Stonewall has done great work in terms of pushing LGBT rights. And in many ways, it has become a victim of its own success. As parity is reached, then, of course, Stonewall has to reach to another group to look after. And I think that's how they ended up pushing trans rights. But I want to talk about that a little later on. What is interesting, this is the latest news coming out of the Daily Mail. Transgender celebrities and activists have vowed to defy the Supreme Court judgment. This is pretty shocking. They're basically saying, these are trans women who are saying, look, I identify as a woman, whether you say I'm a woman or not, because you've got a GRC, a gender recognition certificate, but the Supreme Court is saying you're not a woman, you're a trans woman, and they're going to defy the law. So you're going to break the law. Well, that is unacceptable.
Of course it's unacceptable. Look, I mean, I think for most of us, we think live your life the way you want to live it.
Totally agree.
But there are boundaries. There are boundaries in life. There have to be boundaries. You cannot have one group of people able to freely express, do whatever they like, and then, for instance, women who are being negatively affected by this, then having to give up their rights. All it's saying is that they're not saying that you can't live your life as a trans person, that you should be mistreated in any way, but there are limits, and there are always limits to everything we do in life.
Can I just ask you about this? Aunt Lexa, who plays a character called Abby Montgomery in the Netflix series Sex Education, which, by the way, is very good, described feeling heartbroken whilst former Labour MSP candidate Heather Herbert claimed trans people are now under attack. No, they're not. This is about delineation of boundaries, which I said right at the beginning. They've completely misconstrued this. I understand why they feel it's unsettling, but what it does is provide clarity and framework, and then as a result of that, you can implement policy.
Absolutely. Look, I think when people do actually start applying boundaries and they do start being a bit more strict and discerning, it can be uncomfortable. But actually, when we think about it on balance in terms of the greater good and the clarity that this will provide, and how it will give people a very clear framework and very clear guidance on how to resolve these conflicts, in the long term, it's actually so much better. And people will adjust to it and they will adapt to it. And maybe there will be a little bit of pain in doing that, but ultimately it is what needed to happen.
I totally agree, actually, Candice. That brings me nicely to the question I want to ask this afternoon. I'll ask you, actually. After that ruling, then, how can we be sensitive to trans people? That's the question I have for you this afternoon. The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. And you can message us on X at talkTV. I think it's just really crucial that no side, Candice, says we've won this argument. I think what has happened is this is a ruling for common sense, that women and girls, particularly girls, are going to be protected in single-sex spaces, and the small minority of trans women can also be protected.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And in fact, you see many trans women saying, I have no problem with this whatsoever. This is absolutely fine. This does not affect me negatively in any way. I understand why biological women, why this is important to them.
Do you think that we sort of have gone over the peak idiocy, and it's kind of that groupthink thing, isn't it? Where the corporations were so keen, you mentioned Stonewall earlier, they were so keen to get on the league tables of great companies to work for and so on, that they just adopted this groupthink without actually challenging it, pushing it back, saying, hang on a minute, this doesn't actually make sense. I get the sense that many companies are now saying, oh, hang on a minute, we were wrong, and now we need to address it.
Yes, yeah, there was no nuance. That's the problem. I mean, that's the problem when it becomes about virtue signaling. It's actually not a genuine, authentic human response, where actually, sometimes we do have doubts about things and we are a bit skeptical and we do need to sort of have a bit of a tussle and sort of work out where we're going to end up. But that didn't happen. Instead, it was like, you have to accept this. You have to start putting pronouns in your bio. You have to accept that trans women are women. No, actually not. This was not settled in any way. And there were things that needed to be worked out. And I hope that we have reached that point. But I think for many people, they're still sort of, maybe they don't engage with the issues deeply enough, and maybe they don't listen to the other side of the arguments enough. Because I think if they did, and they were a bit more open and they had a bit more empathy and they tried to understand where the other side was coming from and not just assume that they're motivated by bigotry, just like any women on the gender critical side shouldn't look to the opposite side, trans people, and assume that they're all malign. They should also look at their perspective as well. Then maybe we would feel a bit better about it and we wouldn't all be just assuming the worst intentions.
Do you think it stops the companies actually imposing this idea that you have to put your pronouns? I'm lucky, I have a gender-neutral pronoun of doctor.
Yes, yeah. Look, I don't think companies should have ever got involved in this in the first place, the politicization of the workplace. I mean, the work should be a neutral place. If you want to discuss your religion there, if you want to discuss your politics there, absolutely fine. But for many people that I've spoken to, they actually hate that at work. They hate that because you can never... you can never truly express your opinion at a workplace where, for instance, Stonewall was very influential. You try and express gender-critical views, you could get fired.
Well, quite.
So it's actually not an open and tolerant workforce.
I mean, that's really interesting.
Well,
it's really interesting you say that. I'm going to talk about this later, which is, do we really have freedom of speech in this country? I'm going to talk about that at 3 o'clock this afternoon, because there are some great stories today about that, about not being able to express your opinions. And I think if you do that, then you drive it underground, and that leads to resentment and so on. Candice, we have to take a break for the moment. Thank you very much. So I'm asking this afternoon, after the Supreme Court ruling, how can we be sensitive to trans people? The number 0344 499 1000. Hello, David says, Margaret in Birmingham, wishing you all at Talk a very happy Easter. Thank you very much, Margaret, and to you and your family and to everyone else. I wish you a very happy Easter as well. Lots more still to come. After the break, I want to talk about British Steel. Apparently, UK coal was good enough to run the blast furnaces, despite what Ed Miliband says. Also, bin strike activists are plotting a new pro-Palestine party. There's an article that says, actually, the hotbed of Islamic extremism is now the United Kingdom. And the fat jab becomes the fat pill. We'll talk more about that after this break. This is Talk.
I was looking earlier about this new hub for counter-terrorism, which was built in 2021, and this is what police chiefs said about creating it. And they said, counter-terrorism threats are multiplying and the style of attack is changing. Organised crime grows more complex and demands new responses. There is an ongoing urgency to create this hub. Doing nothing is not an option. Doing nothing is not an option, but doing an Easter egg hunt is apparently an option.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk 121. I'm joined by Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster this afternoon. Very happy Easter to every single person. Now, look at this, Candice. This is a really interesting article, which is at the back of the Telegraph today. But actually, it's really important. Germany is to deport single and healthy asylum seekers. This is a real win, actually, for Friedrich Merz. He's the incoming German Chancellor. He wants to reduce migration levels. As you remember, under Angela Merkel, it went absolutely ballistic, the number of people, immigrants coming into Germany. This is really key because the Federal Administrative Court in Leipzig has ruled that asylum seekers who meet the criteria can cope with the lack of support from the state in Greece because they will not face inhumane treatment in the country. Let me just be clear. So under the Dublin Agreement, asylum seekers are meant to be processed in the first EU country they enter. That is often not done. But essentially, these people have gone to Greece, had their asylum application processed. They've gone to Germany, filed a separate asylum application saying that actually the conditions in Greece are not good enough for them. And the court in Germany has said, hang on a minute, that's not acceptable. You go back to Greece. And I think it's a massive win for Germany.
Yeah, it's so similar to what we were just talking about. Now people are starting to apply boundaries and starting to apply structure after, I think, a period of what some people looked at as openness, but I think that was very over-generous. I mean, you know, what Angela Merkel did, ultimately it's not realistic. And I mean, in this article in the Telegraph, you know, they were saying we just cannot integrate people when they come in these huge numbers. It is just not possible. There is a limit to our generosity and our kindness. And if people have arrived in Greece, Greece is a perfectly safe country, that is where they must stay. The onus is not upon us. You know, there has to be limits to this.
Well,
you know,
and you see, but this goes back to the big problem here in this country. So if Greece is basically giving you bread and water, which is and somewhere to stay overnight, which is essentially what Greece does. If you come to the United Kingdom, what do we give you? We give you a 5-star hotel and food and all the rest of it. Is it any surprise that people are coming to this country? So I was just looking back at the numbers, the sheer numbers coming across the English Channel. 8,000 so far this year. It's the worst start to a year. The total 46% higher than at this point in 2024. So clearly the United Kingdom is a massive draw.
It is. I mean, there's just huge pull factors. And you know what the Rwanda scheme did, and it was starting to work. People were starting to go via Ireland before it was scrapped. You have to understand people's incentives. If people know that there is a huge chance that their asylum application will be accepted, if there's very generous treatment when they arrive here, then they will come. People are rational. They act in rational ways, especially if they've paid a lot of money to one of these human trafficking gangs to get them here. You know, people will make that calculation. You know, will I get return on my investment? Unfortunately, I think, you know, the Labour government were just horribly naive. I mean, they just turned against the Rwanda scheme, and that they thought they could tackle the supply side. So they thought, okay, well, we'll just tackle the gangs rather than manage the demand side, which is people. You know,
and of
people
course,
and their incentives.
but Labour did it because it was ideologically opposed to Rwanda. It didn't even give it a chance. We didn't see a plane take off. And I think you're right. What we saw was a change in those migration patterns. We saw the migrants going to Ireland, so it was beginning to work. Now, whether it was the right scheme, I don't know. But talking about naivety, this is a fascinating article. British steel executives have admitted that UK coal could fuel its blast furnaces. This is all about, if you remember, of course, this is Scunthorpe, the blast furnaces, that they got this recall to Parliament. They voted through emergency legislation, getting rid of Jinjay or removing the operations or the daily operations from Jinjay, then importing the coke from Australia and from America. It now transpires, and this is due to work by Richard Tice, the deputy leader of Reform UK, that actually British coal is good enough to provide the coke, to keep the blast furnaces open. And if you remember, this is Mad Ed Miliband, who is obsessed with net zero. He is the one that has turned down, or at least the Labour government, has turned down the permission for Whitehaven, which was granted permission by Michael Gove in 2022, which would have been our first coal mine in 30 years. Here we go, the idiocy of net zero once again.
It is. It's like a religion, and it stops people from thinking in the most pragmatic, sensible, common sense way. I mean, we're looking for growth in this country. I mean, we have some of the highest energy prices in the world. Don't we want good jobs for people. I mean, we know that as soon as a country has industrialized, it has good, reliable, plentiful energy, it develops, it grows, it brings so many good things for people. But we have the wrong people in the wrong positions at the time, making the wrong decisions. And, you know, for me, I think, you know, I'm considered radical because I would go for fracking and all these sorts of things, because I think if you want to level up poorer areas of the north, just unlock that potential. All I see is like well-paid jobs for people, thriving industry, energy bills could come right down. For me, it's just like win, 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 win. And it's, for me, it's the height of idiocy that people like Ed Miliband don't allow this to happen.
So it's really interesting. I was in the north. I was near Liverpool yesterday. And actually what I heard on the ground was people saying, we are forgotten by Westminster, that we, you know, some of the towns I was in, they have a proud industrial heritage. They went into terminal decline after the Industrial Revolution. The government, successive governments, just haven't invested in those areas. And of course, this Westminster bubble and obsession with net zero does not reflect the realities of what people at home are thinking. You're right, they want cheap energy. We need companies to employ people. We need pubs to stay open. None of that can happen if your energy costs go through the roof.
Yes, you know, you're so right that you say that. I mean, I have a number, my family, a lot of them live in the north, in Macclesfield, and Macclesfield used to be an old mill town. It was the end of the Silk Road, and they have this amazing museum there where they talk about all the manufacturing, basically, of textiles. And I'll never forget when I visited how proud they were of that history, that role that they played in the Industrial Revolution. I mean, that's such a big part of the British psyche, and for many people in the north of England as well. But it's almost like, you know, now, green zealotry in particular, they're ashamed of it. It's like they want to get rid of it. It's like a part of our history that they just want to push off to the side, when meanwhile, it's what made us us.
So let me ask you a tricky question. In terms of the Labour government, I mean, I think you can see the popularity declining by the day. What's going to be the biggest bugbear for the Labour government? Is it going to be the folly of net zero? Is it going to be immigration that is going to come back and bite the Labour government? Is it the cost of living? Is it all of the above?
I think it's all of the above, but I mean, my feeling is that immigration is the big driver. And I don't think it's just here. I think this is all over Europe. I think this is in America. I think, you know, people feel like we've had a period of just open borders for a very long time. And now people are like, listen, things need to be tightened up a bit now, because you know what? In these numbers, people cannot integrate. And also, you know, you look at things like the cost of the asylum system, it's huge, yet you're cutting the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. People are saying, hang on a minute, like, what are your priorities here? And it does seem like the system isn't prioritizing the right things. It's sort of just mindly implementing this extreme version of liberalism that I don't think anyone in the country consented to.
And you're right, Candice, and as they say, charity begins at home. It's such a pleasure to talk to you. I wish you a very happy...
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Good. I wish you a very happy Easter as well. That's Candice Holdsworth, writer and broadcaster. So this afternoon, lots of questions I have for you, actually, after the Supreme Court ruling. How can we be sensitive to trans people? It is not a win for either side. I think it's actually about common sense, laying down a framework and making sure that now the public institutions fall in line and make sure that we stop this peak idiocy that we got to. Also, very keen to hear your thoughts on the win in Germany, sending illegal migrants back to Greece. Is that something we should adopt here, be much tougher on illegal immigrants into this country? I know your response already to that. Let me know your thoughts on anything that you want to talk about this holiday, 4-day holiday over Easter. 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. And you can also message us on X as well at talkTV. Now, after the break, I want to talk a little more about this ruling from the Supreme Court and what it means for trans people. I want to talk to Stephanie Davis-Arai, who's founder and director of Transgender Trend. I'm also asking, as you know, how can we be sensitive to trans people as well? What do we do from here? How do we actually move forward from that ruling? Don't go anywhere. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, thank you very much for your company on this Good Friday. Lots of messages coming in, as you would expect. David, these asylum seekers in Germany are claiming the conditions in Greece aren't good enough for them, so their living conditions were better in their homeland than in Greece. Make them prove that to a court or deport them to countries of origin. Fern in Glasgow, thank you for that. David, please, this is Dave in South Gloucestershire. I'm being told off. Please don't plant the seed that gender-neutral pronouns like doctors should be used. I was actually saying it tongue-in-cheek. If that happens, we will then have to use pronouns like citizen, or more appropriately for thus governments, comrade. We've got enough difficulties when ms became fashionable amongst some people. Joanna in Salisbury, one of our regulars. Good afternoon to you, Joanna. David, you don't have to be sensitive to trans people. They aren't and have never been a problem. It is the activists that have seen they can make money out of it, and now they can't. Andy Warhol's 10 minutes of fame. If trans people are going to break the law, they're treading a very fine line, because they could end up in a prison they don't want to be in. I'm asking the question this afternoon, after that Supreme Court ruling, how can we be sensitive to trans people? 0344 499 1000. Well, this is based on this article. As we know, Britain's biggest bank has pledged solidarity with transgender staff after the Supreme Court ruling on the legal rights of women. We saw that ruling. Essentially what it says is there are two sexes, and that a biological woman constitutes a woman, and that a trans woman is not a biological woman. That is basically what it says. It is very clear in its guidance, and I think now it provides that framework and clarity that businesses and organisations actually need. Well, joining me now is Stephanie Davis-Arai, who's founder and director of Transgender. Trent, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
What's your feeling on the ruling? For me, I welcome it. I think it provides clarity. I think it protects young girls and women. It gives single-sex spaces. At the same time, though, it isn't a win for either side. What we now have to do is to make sure we accommodate appropriately trans women and trans men so that they have places to change. And so, actually, this is, for me, a common-sense ruling.
It is a common sense ruling, and I think it is a win for one side. It's a win for women who've had their rights taken away over the last decade. Let's remember, this just goes back to what the law was before it was changed.
Very good point.
So women, you know, the amount of suffering this has caused for women self-excluding from facilities, leisure centres, women's only groups, because men have been allowed in, toilets, changing rooms, and we've seen cases of prisons and rape crisis centres even. So, yeah, women have had to organise and get together in grassroots organisations and try and reverse this unlawful policy of including men in the word woman in the Equality Act.
So how did we end up in this ridiculous situation? Who empowered it? Was it the politicians? Is it the people who were trying to do the right thing? Is it organisations like Stonewall that were pushing the corporate organisations into this groupthink mentality?
Well, do you know what? I think the organisation that I feel the most angry with is the regulator, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, because it's their job. They have one job, and that's to simply explain the Equality Act to the rest of us. You know, and that means service providers, workplaces, schools, everybody. And they failed in that one job because they took, at a time actually when David Isaac was chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Now he's ex-Stonewall chair, and the interpretation of the Equality Act was wrong. It was unlawful, and the Equality and Human Rights Commission published their code of practice that led everybody astray. But also we have Stonewall, and of course, and their influence on businesses, on companies, on workplaces, in schools, everywhere. And, you know, I can't tell you why everybody went along with it and followed Stonewall law rather than the actual law. But I think there needs to be a public inquiry because...
They're just very expensive. What does it achieve?
Well, a number of organisations across the board who've been totally captured by what is an ideology. It's a belief.
Sure.
It's a belief that some men literally are women. And so that has overtaken reality. All the judgment said on Wednesday was, we're back to reality now. We're back to knowing, as everybody has always known, that women are biological females and men are biological males. And you cannot operate equality law and anti-discrimination law for women if women includes men. It's impossible.
I agree. I mean, I was talking about Stonewall. I think Stonewall in the past has done some really good work in terms of equality of rights for LGBT people. But in many ways, when they achieve parity across the... Well, not across the board, but when rights improve for lesbian, gay people across the board, pretty much, then I think Stonewall had to reinvent itself, and that's when it started to attach itself to the trans lobby. And I think what happened was many companies wanted to show that they had equal opportunity of employment across the board as well, and they then went along with the ruling from Stonewall, and I think they couldn't see the wood for the trees in the end.
No, and I think there's another group here we have to mention, which is Gendered Intelligence, who taught Stonewall, and Stonewall's first school policies were informed by Gendered Intelligence. Gendered Intelligence have worked everywhere, the FA, with prisons, everywhere. They keep a lower profile than Stonewall, but they're a trans lobby group, and they have gone in and made their demands. And these are not rights that trans people have had that have now been taken away. They were demands, they were privileges. You know, men should never have been in women's spaces. And so I do think that you know, the capture has been across the board. It's been in politics, political parties. Nobody has stood up for women. And it amuses me in some way that we're asking the question, how now do we look after people that are sensitive? Nobody has asked that question about women. These policies were put in without asking women what we think, and you know, nobody said, you know, well, how would women respond if they're using a toilet and in the workplace, and a man is using the toilet next to them, and how will, you know, or changing rooms, the case of Sandy Peggy with NHS 5, for example. Nobody asked the question how women feel about it. So forgive me if I'm a little bit, you know, actually now the law's back to how it was and how it always should have been. Let's believe that the men that have been using women's toilets and change rooms are adults, and they can accept that the law is now as it should always have been.
I want to come to that in just a minute, if I may, just in terms of overreach from Stonewall. And of course, what the companies were trying to achieve was to become a Stonewall diversity champion. But Simon Fanshawe, who's one of the founders of Stonewall, has actually urged bosses to abandon Stonewall. He says employers can now take advice from the highest court in the land rather than from Stonewall and other lobby groups. And that is a victory for common sense. My worry is also about politicians who never answer the question. We saw the Prime Minister telling us that actually a woman, I think, I can't remember what he said, but he wasn't sure what a woman was. None of them seemed to know what a woman was. And actually, a colleague of ours here at Times Radio interviewed Karen Smith, and she was asked which changing rooms transgender women should use, and she couldn't give an answer. Let's just pause and look at that clip.
We're looking for clarity from you as the government. This is the crux of the problem, and this is why I'm asking these questions, is that for years there has been confusion about how people should deal with these issues. We now have a legal ruling from the highest court in the land, and it sounds to me as if you don't know whether a trans woman which changing room they should be using today.
Female changing rooms should be used by women.
Right. And so where should a trans woman get changed? And
it's important that a trans woman or a trans man also has dignity in their use of public spaces.
She didn't answer the question, did she? So where do trans women change?
They're still fudging it. A trans woman is a man and therefore is entitled to use the men's changing room and not entitled to use the women's changing room. It's really, really simple.
Well, is it? So what do men think about... Well, hang on a minute. What do men think about that? Because if you are a... So I'm just wondering how you protect spaces for men.
Well, it's male female, you know, or men use the spaces together. If men object to another man coming in wearing a dress and makeup, well, men have to deal with that. You know, they can accept...
But if you're a trans woman, why don't you have the privacy of having your own cubicle, for example? So surely there's an onus for companies to then make sure that those facilities are available.
Right, and this is what they should have been doing all along. They should have been providing a separate toilet that anybody can use, male or female, and so that in that case everybody's privacy is preserved. Because you're right. I mean, men also want privacy and dignity in toilets and changing rooms. It's just that it's more important for women. So this policy has actually been, yes, because women, you know, men are not at risk of hidden cameras or men, or, you know, women are not going to be coming in and listening to men on the toilet, or women have things like periods to deal with. It's more embarrassing for women, and there's a safety aspect for women. If men can come into women's toilets by just saying, I'm a woman, then we don't know who that man is. Whether he's wearing a dress or not, whether he says he's trans or not, we don't know. And so women are made to feel more uncomfortable because of the Safety Act.
But what about people who are trans men going into male changing rooms? Doesn't that make men uncomfortable too?
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely. I think men deserve privacy when getting changed, privacy from the opposite sex. And so the third space option is one that the trans lobby groups should have been advocating for from the start, and workplaces should have considered the rights that women and men both had in terms of privacy in changing rooms. You know, workplace toilet regulations and schools regulations, because the group I feel most angry about and sorry for at the moment is the children in schools.
I agree.
These school policies have been put in. Children have been led to believe that, you know, boys have been led to believe that they have the right to use girls' toilets, girls' changing rooms, even overnight accommodation, and participate in girls' sports. They don't have that right. It's been real cruelty to children to adapt all, you know, all policies to make that possible, and lead them to believe they have those rights when they don't. And this has led to social transition in schools, and we have the schools to clinic pipeline. You know, schools really need now to make the policy clear to children, and their job now is to help the children that they've basically lied to all of this time. And that needs really sensitive treatment.
It does, and of course the government now has been urged to clarify what this means for single-sex schools, because the schools are now looking to government saying, hang on a minute, you need to clarify to us.
And I think
what's going on.
There's a very simple way to do this. You can say, you know, we're no longer going to tell girls they're boys. We're no longer going to tell boys they're girls. It's not fair because the law doesn't say that, or the Equality Act doesn't say that. When they move out into wider society, they're going to find that that's not accepted. And so schools can allow children to, teenagers, as they always have done, to go into their little groups and tribes and identify how they want. Their friends can call them whatever they ask, but the adults shouldn't be joining in. So you're not saying this is wrong and this is bad. Teenagers have a right to explore their identity. It's their job. And so they can get on with doing that, and the schools can support them and be sensitive to them, and obviously provide the help if they have mental health issues. But they shouldn't be joining in telling girls they're boys or telling boys they're girls. They're setting children up for huge disappointment. And the trans lobby groups have a lot to answer for in how they've told children that they're the biggest victims in society. And that is not good for children. We need to actually trust that children are resilient, and if they know the rules and the rules are clear, then they can follow them. And actually, children are relieved when the rules are clear and the adults are clear about those rules.
Can I just ask you about this? Transgender celebrities and activists have vowed to defy the Supreme Court. These are high-profile individuals that have followers, particularly young followers on Instagram and whatever else, like Ella Morgan, who says, I still myself as a woman, I feel a woman whether I am on paper or not, I will continue to use female bathrooms. You are breaking the law. And Lexa, who stars in Sex Education, says she is heartbroken. Belle Priestley, who has 1.4 million followers, saying that Britain was going backwards. Look, they are not above the law.
No, but also the message children are getting is that this will destroy them.
Yes.
You know, that is such a cruel thing, cruel message to give to children. And the other message that's given to them, of course, that we've seen a lot of, is that they're more likely to take their own lives. This has to stop. Children need a basis of reality. We've disrupted reality for children for a decade now in schools. And I think, now we adults have to be adults again and put that right.
Really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time on this Good Friday. Stephanie Davis-Arai, founder and director of Transgender Trends. So many messages coming in. I'll just do a couple before the break. David, just changed the disabled toilet sign in public and workplaces to accommodate the trans argument. That's Herne Bay Mike. But what does that do about discriminating against those people who are disabled, who need to use those disabled facilities? Surely what you need to provide is actually accommodation alongside that. Great show. This is Bev. Thank you. Trans subject. Let's not forget, young female children are going into toilets and into changing rooms. No mother would want strange man in that area at all. I can't believe we actually allowed this situation to arise. I would agree, and I think most people in this country actually can't believe we reached this peak zenith of madness, quite frankly. We have so much more still to come. Get in touch, please, this afternoon. Look, how do we now become sensitive to trans people, the minority of people who are trans people, whilst protecting the right to have single-sex spaces? That's the question I'm asking this afternoon. 0344 499 1000. Also very keen to hear from you about anything you want to talk about this afternoon. Do get in touch. After the break, your calls, thoughts and messages. This is Talk.
We've gone to those talks with a number of ways that this dispute can be resolved. Unfortunately, the council turned up with nothing.
Is there an offer for another meeting?
Well, the council have said that they'll meet us on Wednesday of next week. Our position...
Next week?
There you go. Exactly, Mike. Which is why my position is that we are ready to meet. And for those of us who are old enough to remember the Martini advert, anytime, any place, anywhere.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Some very passionate arguments. David, this is Brad in Cambridge. I have no problem at all with a fella in a frock using the same changing room as me. We're both biologically male and we have the same equipment. Where's the problem? Good afternoon, David. When Stonewall moved from being a reputable pressure group for equality to a pressure group of activists for tiny fringe groups, they lost all credibility with the average person like me. That's kind of what I was saying, that Stonewall did amazing work early on, and I think they almost did so well they wrote themselves out of a job and then had to sort of broaden their portfolio to keep themselves going. Good afternoon, this is Barry. I'm really disappointed with the King's Easter message. I revered his mother, but all he continues to do is to pour fuel on the fire of republicanism. The country is in a real mess. Keep those messages coming in, please. Dave in London is on the line. Good afternoon to you.
Hi Dave, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks very much indeed. Your thoughts on this? Is this a ruling for common sense? Does this provide framework and structure, and now we can move past the zenith of peak idiocy?
Yes, I think it provides framework and structure, which means, for example, when you were having the conversation, well, where does the trans woman then go when it comes to the toilets? And I think Stephanie said they are not entitled to use the women's toilets. They're entitled to use the men's toilets. So if let's say someone says, right, well, I'm going to test this anyway. I'm going to just do it, and I'm going to go into the women's toilets, and then the police get called or whatever. Then the police now have a framework. So just say, are you a man or a woman? Well, I'm trans. I didn't ask you that question. Are you a man or are you a woman?
Biologically.
Well, the term biological can go away now because woman by default means biological woman. That was the ruling. So are you a man or a woman? I'm a man, but as you can see, I look like a woman. Fine, you're not entitled to use those facilities, sir.
So
that's it.
Right.
And then that doesn't mean someone who really has gone through all of the surgery and to be honest, really does look like a woman. So
if you are a trans woman and you've had surgery and you no longer have a penis, are you now changing in a male changing room? Because I would suggest that is strange.
Well, the reason you think it's strange is because as men, we should be dealing with abnormal men and not handing our problem to women.
No, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying surely there needs to be a space for trans men or women to change, because if you are because if you've gone through surgery, does that not then in some ways affect the men? What I'm trying to do is put the male argument.
Right. So I think all this stuff about third spaces isn't really going to make any difference. The reason that the trans woman wants to be in the women's space is because they want to be treated as a woman. So they're not going to go into a third space. If you remember, in order to
but that's not true, because I've spoken to trans women who are very happy to go into a private space.
Well, yes, but when they tried to do it with sport and they came up with a transgender category for the swimming, nobody entered it. Because that's the whole
but hang on a minute, unless I've got this...
But
if I've got this completely wrong, if you're a trans woman and you've had surgery and you no longer have a penis, you're then in a male changing room, and that would arouse interest... Arouse is probably the wrong word, but it would then provoke interest from men, wouldn't it?
Well, OK, it's just provoked interest. Yeah, so what's your problem, mate? Well, I'm wondering why you're in here, because you don't seem to have a penis. Well, number one, I'm not sure why you're so fascinated in looking at my genitals anyway. And number two, I am a man.
Well, I think you'd notice if someone had a vagina and not a penis, wouldn't you?
Well, yeah, but if it's a man, it's a man, you know. It's my.
But if you don't look like a man, if you don't look like a man and you're in a male changing room, then that doesn't undermine the privacy of men?
No, because it's a man that's with you. That's the point.
I understand that, but I'm not sure that's how everyone feels.
Well, they have to now because they just.
I don't think they do have to now. I don't think they do. But what they do... So I think the onus now is on those organisations is to provide safety and safe spaces for everyone to change.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying is... What I'm saying is, if you did have the third... Imagine you have now the third changing rooms at the swimming pool. It'll probably get used once every 3 months.
Right.
So you're going to create...
But how often is it used by disabled people, for example?
Well, disabled is again another issue. By the way, I sometimes use the disabled toilets. I'm not entitled to use them, and should I?
Well, that's naughty.
Use them well, of course it's naughty, but I know I'm not supposed to be in there, right?
Yeah.
I can't say, well, actually, I've just had a hip replacement, so I think that makes me disabled. No, it doesn't. You've had a hip replacement. You're not entitled to use the disabled toilet because you quite clearly aren't disabled, so you can't pretend you are by having some little ailment, if you like. You see what I mean? So it's about entitlement.
Dave, really good to talk to you this afternoon. I think we could go round and round discussing this this afternoon. Keep your calls coming in on this subject. After the break, we'll go through our political digest. Joining me, Reem Ibrahim. That's all still to come. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Afternoon, just after 2 o'clock on Good Friday. A very good afternoon to you. I'm David Bull in for Ian Collins. Now, coming up this hour, rapists can no longer identify as women under the Supreme Court's landmark ruling, but trans activists have vowed to defy the ruling, continuing to use single-sex toilets whilst claiming blatant discrimination. Meanwhile, Scotland's First Minister John Swinney warns that Nigel Farage could become the next UK Prime Minister, calling it incredibly damaging for for the UK. And an inquest into 4 deaths caused by drivers with poor eyesight has condemned the UK's ineffective and unsafe enforcement of visual standards, calling its licensing system the laxest in Europe. You can call or leave a voice note, the number 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also message us at talkTV. Well, a very good afternoon to you. Crikey, what a first hour we've had talking about the Supreme Court ruling and the ramifications of that and the framework that hopefully it then gives to public organisations like the police and also the NHS as well. Phil says, hi, David. What did trans people actually do for using public toilets before all the madness started? Keep all those messages coming in, please. How do we sensitively now handle trans people? Is it a victory for one side or is it a victory for the other side? Let me know your thoughts on all of that as well. Kath says, David, the High Court ruling is a victory for truth and for facts. Trevor, good afternoon to you in Harrow. Good afternoon, Dr. David. I wonder if 6 or more police officers will be dispatched if trans activists break the law as were being used when people posted common sense tweets. I bet they won't. And it will be another example of two-tier policing. Keep those messages coming in, please. Let me just bring you some news. The US Secretary of State says the Trump administration could abandon its Ukraine war peace efforts within days unless there is progress and willingness from both sides. Marco Rubio, this is. He was in Paris for meetings with European leaders to discuss how to end the conflict. Let's pause and listen to what he had to say.
But we're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well. I think it's important to remind everybody that the Ukraine war is a terrible thing, but it's not our war. We didn't start it. The United States has been helping Ukraine over the last 3 years, and we want it to end. So if they're serious about peace, either side or both, we want to help. If it's not going to happen, then we're just going to move on.
That's Marco Rubio speaking there. He was in Paris for meetings with European leaders. Let me know your thoughts on that statement from Marco Rubio. Lots of messages coming in. Good afternoon, David. By no means, this is Joe, by no means does the ruling attack trans people, but it does definitely lower the risk of girls getting attacked in a single-sex space. It's shocking that we have got to this point. I hope in 10 years' time there is a trivia question which says, what year did women get their rights back? Keep those messages coming in. Good afternoon, David. Have talk fallen asleep? What? I asked this because I've not heard this mentioned yet, and it's this. On Saturday, drama queen Starmer recalled Parliament, yes, an emergency meeting to save Scunthorpe Steel. That's right. Everyone thinks good about time, whatever. It was a pantomime. I mentioned that on my breakfast show. Look at me, look what I've done. Aren't I good? What a load of rubbish. So they said they've now ordered all the coal and stuff needed to keep it going. Well, I say the whole thing is lies, because with 3 days, all the stuff required was here on a cargo ship. Now, I find this very strange. How is it possible to order on Saturday? I can tell you the answer to this. And it's here on Tuesday, just 3 days to come from the USA. More lies from the crooked lying government. This must have been done deal 23, 24 days ago. It would take at least 22 days to get here on a cargo ship. So this needs investigation, don't you think? Just thought I'd mention it. Now, there are lots of points to this. First of all, Jonathan Reynolds knew about this problem much earlier on, so they may well have enacted something to do a deal. Then Ginjay then decided they weren't going to pay for that cargo shipment. So the shipment was already en route. The government then pitched in and then used public money to secure the coke which was needed for those blast furnaces. At the same time, so all of that was sort of going on at the same time. I agree with you. It was a pantomime, because what they did is they allowed Parliament to be dissolved and then recalled it to have this moment of national triumph where they then said, look at us, aren't we brilliant because we've saved British Steel? Well, you haven't, have you? Because the detail is that it was Ed Miliband who was determined to close the blast furnaces in the first place, to bring in electric furnaces which cannot produce virgin steel. And at a time of incredible global insecurity, we need to be able to produce virgin steel. So the government has been very economical with the truth here, and I think people are just waking up. And that big article I mentioned that from Richard Tice showing that actually British Steel could have continued operating with UK coal, even though the government says that is not possible. As we know, planning permission for the coal mine at Whitehaven was granted in 2022. It would have been the first new coal mine in 30 years. It was then blocked by the High Court in 2024. This was after campaigns by environmental groups, and Angela Rayner's decision not to challenge that ruling led to plans being dropped. So the argument is pretty simple, because if you actually allowed that plant to open, you've then got coal, that produces coke, you can keep the blast furnaces operating, you don't have to import it. And think about the global footprint, or the environmental footprint of importing coal from around the world. I rest my case. It's now time for our political digest. Joining me, Reem Ibrahim, Communications Officer at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Hello, Reem.
Hello, David. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Happy Easter to you. Let's start with this big article, shall we? Farage is likely to be the next Prime Minister, according to the SNP leader. This is John Swinney. He says he's worried that the Reform UK leader could enter number 10 at the next general election. Right. He claimed it would be incredibly damaging to the UK. There's a great irony here. The SNP is trying to break up the UK. But nevertheless, Nigel Farage is going to be damaging. There is a high likelihood that he will get in. And then he goes on to say, I think the values of the UK would be changed in an incredibly damaging way. And the values of the UK would change fundamentally in how it is perceived around the world. That would be bad for all of us. That is the most divisive comment I have read in a long time.
It's also just simply untrue. I mean, the idea that the global political instability would occur as a result of Nigel Farage being Prime Minister, or indeed Reform doing particularly well in the polls, is just absolutely untrue. We know that, for example, the US President Donald Trump have an incredibly good relationship with Nigel Farage. We also know that they respect Reform UK more than they respect pretty much any other political party. Now, I'm not saying this from a sort of party political angle, but it is just simply untrue to say that for some reason the global world is going to see the UK any differently, that they're not going to respect us. I actually think it's the complete opposite. And in so many ways, especially when we're thinking about the economics of this, the number one thing that would ensure that we get this kind of economic prosperity in the UK would actually be a free trade deal with the US. We already have a pretty good free trade agreement with the European Union. We don't necessarily need it. And the US is the largest trading partner to the UK. So really, when we're even just thinking about it from a policy perspective, that relationship they have is so valuable. And I don't think people emphasise that enough.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Nigel Farage obviously has hit back at John Swinney. I mean, I think what this shows is John Swinney is deeply concerned about what is going to happen in Scotland. Let's just look at the latest polls. I have to be careful. We're in the local and mayoral elections at the moment. This is just a factual piece of evidence. This comes, and of course, polls will vary. This is Find Out Now UK. This was published on the 16th of April. This is compared with changes from the 9th of April. It now shows Reform UK at 28%, Labour at 22%, Conservatives at 20%, Liberal Dems at 14% and Greens at 10%. There is a lot of talk. Hopefully we can show you that graphic in just a minute. But there is a lot of talk from various people about what this means. When you're starting to see that actually Reform in the lead at 28%, you've got very worried people on your side of the pond in the Conservative Party saying, oh, well, doesn't this mean that actually what we need is an alliance with Reform?
Well, it is interesting, actually. When I speak to Reform UK politicians, an alliance seems to be, completely out of the question, whereas Conservatives are a little bit more inclined to say, well, never say never. It definitely feels as though that relationship is a little bit one-sided. I will say, I mean, even from my perspective, I've been really quite disappointed with a lot of Reform's policy announcements. I'm not supportive of the nationalisation of steel. I don't think the energy policies were particularly good, and I had a bit of a tiff with Richard Tice on Twitter over the energy policy specifically.
Can I just pause? Well, hang on a minute. I just want to pause. Why wouldn't you nationalise, emergency nationalisation of British Steel? Surely we need Virgin Steel. That gives us security in this country. What are you going to do? Give it to another Chinese company?
Well, we do need virgin steel. However, I've got to be completely honest with you. Scunthorpe is not, absolutely not, going to ensure domestic security. It already doesn't. Unfortunately, the reality is we already do not produce enough steel to protect ourselves.
Agreed. But Reem, surely if we open a coal mine, then we've got the coke. We can then open other blast furnaces. In that article, Richard Tice talks about other furnaces that are sitting idly by for a small investment. We can get them up and running. Isn't this just the transition period into actually making sure we can produce virgin steel?
No, it isn't. And actually, this is really where the argument is, I think, it's sort of founded on an incorrect perspective. The idea that we need to be, in order for there to be security, we need to be producing it ourselves. That's just simply not true.
You want it to come from China, do you?
No, I want it to come from Canada, from all of the other steel-producing nations across the world. Free trade is stability. Actually, when we're reliant on one very, very shoddy domestic supply, it is not security. Security is when we have multiple partners across the world that are able to produce steel. Now, we all know that the Chinese are heavily subsidizing their steel, and that's why they are, well, one of the reasons why they are much more globally competitive. And I say thank you very much. If the Chinese want to act economically poorly and it benefits us, I honestly don't see any problem with that. The national security concern is an interesting question, but do not kid yourselves. If you think that saving Scunthorpe is going to ensure our domestic security, you are completely for the birds. I mean, seriously, it really wouldn't. And we've got to be very honest about this. If we were to go to war right now, as if we were to go to war today, we would not have the steel domestically to
well,
ensure...
I also think we don't have the troops either, do we?
No, exactly. And actually, if we want to be thinking about security, we should be spending money on defence as a whole and not worrying about nationalising the steel industry. I also am against nationalisation as a whole. I think that this is basically Labour Party policy, and that's why I was really disappointed to see it coming from...
I mean, it is quite interesting coming from Reform UK. There is no doubt that they are trying to target working class voters in the north, the floating voter. You're right. That will play well.
I really think this is interesting. I no longer see Reform as the replacement to the Conservative Party or attempting to do so. I see them as actually more of a rival to the Labour Party than anything, specifically, and that's why they're announcing these kind of policies, and I don't necessarily support them. But what's interesting about this Telegraph article, the fact that we're highlighting the comments from the SNP leader, what's interesting about it is they're highlighting culture. Now, as much as a policy nerd like me cares about the ins and outs of nationalising steel and the energy policies and banning battery energy storage systems, and I don't like any of that, the average voter, I don't think, really cares. And I recognise that I'm not necessarily thinking about things like an average voter. If you are somebody that thinks about culture, and that's what the leader of the SNP was talking about, people like, and I like the culture of Reform. I like the idea that they are unequivocally aware of what a woman is, and they don't need anybody to tell them or question how they're defining that. I like the idea that Nigel Farage is saying, you know what, I think that adults should be allowed to do what they want. The smoking ban is completely illiberal. I like these ideas and I like the culture. So, you know, the economics, to be completely honest, as far as I'm concerned, of course, I'm from the Institute of Economic Affairs, what I care about, the majority of people I don't think do. They care about having a leader that loves this country, and there is no questioning that Nigel Farage does.
What is behind John Swinney's outburst, do you think?
I think there is a leftist culture where they are completely unaware of the fact that somebody like Nigel Farage could be so popular, especially with young people, especially with people that look like me, that are ethnic minorities or young women. They are really, really quite surprised, and they just can't fathom it. The clock's turning, they just can't get it through their head. I really do think this is a bit of a phenomenon where there are certain parts of the left that really cannot understand it. And there is a bit of snobbery to it, actually. There is a bit of, well, you can't possibly understand. You've been captured by the populist right, and it's because you're too, quite frankly, stupid to understand the implications of these kind of party politics. And I think that there is a huge amount of snobbery on the left, actually, especially when it comes to a misunderstanding. We saw it with Brexit, people sort of saying that everybody that voted for Brexit was too stupid to understand what our relationship with the European Union actually was in reality. And I think that basically those people are going to get a kick up the backside. Somebody like the leader of the SNP is going to get a kick up the backside. Understand, if you basically belittle voters and tell them, you know what, because you believe this, because you believe immigration is too high, or because you believe in certain cultural factors, you are too stupid to understand the reality, those people are not going to win elections, and people are going to just completely feel as though they're being patronised. I think that that's probably the best word to use. It's the kind of leftist patronising tone that effectively means that they cannot fathom, the cogs are turning, they cannot fathom why these particular people love this kind of party politics. And it is ultimately love for this country and a feeling that there is an optimistic future rather than the negativity we often see from the left.
Reem, let's just pause there if we can. I'd like to take this over the break. We've got more to talk about. I want to talk about Donald Trump and, of course, the immediacy of a deal with the United States. Meanwhile, of course, Keir Starmer seems to be taking his eye off the ball and looking to Europe. Here we go again, sidling up to the European Union, having mutual recognition of standards on agri-food. That is going to enrage Donald Trump. Also, I want to talk about this. Allah sees everything. Gaza groups tell Muslims who they should vote for. Is that electoral interference? We'll talk about that after this break. Reem will be back. This is Talk.
We've gone to those talks with a number of ways that this dispute can be resolved. Unfortunately, the council turned up with nothing.
Is there an offer for another meeting?
Well, the council have said that they'll meet us on Wednesday of next week. Our position...
Next week?
There you go. Exactly, Mike. Which is why my position is that we are ready to meet, and for those of us who are old enough to remember the Martini advert, anytime, any place, anywhere.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk. I'm in conversation with Reem Ibrahim, Communications Officer at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Shall we talk about Donald Trump, of course? Donald Trump has suggested that Buckingham Palace is setting a date for September. This is his second visit to the UK. We know, look, he's an Anglophile, isn't he? His mother was born and brought up on the Hebridean island of Lewis. He's opening a golf course in Aberdeenshire. I think it's the second golf course, actually, there. And then he says they're going to do a second fest, apparently. A fest. It's beautiful. It's the first time it's ever happened to one person, so he's terribly pleased that he's getting this afforded to him for the second time. He said, oh, it's an honour. I have great respect for King Charles and the family. Well, William, he obviously ignores Harry at this point. There's been no official confirmation from Downing Street on this. But look, this is a good place for the European Union to be imposed with 20% tariffs. It looks, as we heard from JD Vance, like a deal might be about to be signed within weeks with the United States. That's all good. This is the soft power of the monarchy in full swing.
It is, absolutely, and it is definitely a good sign that Donald Trump is going to be visiting the UK, and these are more visits to the UK than he's done to any other country. So it is definitely a very, very good sign, especially, as you said, from this perspective on policy. If we get a free trade agreement with the United States, it's going to be really, really important. I think it's important to understand why that is the case. I mean, the fact that Trump has a very good relationship with the royal family, or at least, as you said, most of the royal family, if we exclude Harry and Meghan. God, I can't believe I have to say their names. But when it comes to Trump and his relationship with the Queen, it was always very beautiful and very, very special. And I think what it is Trump just gets it. And I think that with Americans in general, they are absolutely fascinated with the royal family. I was in the US literally just a week ago.
I saw the pictures.
Yes, it was very, very lovely. And I remember every time I open my mouth and they can hear my accent and they know that I'm from the UK, the first thing that waiters or waitresses or bar staff say to me is, what do you think of the royal family?
I thought it was going to be, do you know the king?
No, God. I think most of them kind of think that the king is a little bit irrelevant in their views on the royal family. What they want to hear about is what do I think about Harry and Meghan? What do I think about Prince William and Kate? And have I seen any of the kids before, and that kind of thing. So they are absolutely obsessed with the royal family. We've got to be very clear about that. Like the royal family, in terms of the soft power that they have with especially Americans that have a very, very glorified view of it, which is a bit ironic because I always point out that, the royal family could have been their royal family if they hadn't.
Good point. Very good point. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We're in a really interesting position, a good position here to strike this trade deal. Now, at the same time, Keir Starmer is sidling up to Europe, trying to get a deal with Europe, closer integration, with agri-foods, making sure that our standards are replicated from the European standards. What is he thinking? If he's going to do that at the same time as trying to get a deal with Donald Trump, that is going to be seen as duplicitous at its very best.
Yes, and there is a bit of a problem here, actually, especially with the comms of this. The UK government, for both political parties, has spent quite a long time trying to scare the British public about American foods. We've all heard this conversation about chlorinated chicken, which is, by the way, complete and utter crap. It isn't true at all. American chicken is absolutely fine. And ultimately, we should be allowing British consumers to choose what they want. That's fundamentally my belief. I believe in free trade. And actually, the benefits of free trade, let me just explain that for a second. Why is it that a free trade agreement with the United States, or any country indeed, is a really, really good idea? It is because no country can produce absolutely everything that they consume. And the more that they go to other countries and buy products that are produced more efficiently, we're able to then get products that are much cheaper. So it means that in the UK, your shopping bill will be lower as a result of free trade. We've seen that happen from time and time again. We know that the costs that people will have to endure will be cheaper because they'll be able to access cheaper products that are produced abroad. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to be forced to buy American products. It doesn't mean that you're forced to buy any products at all. That's the point. It's the fact that you have choice. If you're the kind of person that would prefer, and I probably might find myself in this category, might prefer to buy British food or buy British meats or buy British chickens, that's absolutely fine. You'll have that choice. But if you are a single mother with a family of 4 kids, and you cannot afford to buy lots and lots of meat products every single week, actually the option to have a cheaper product that may be less quality or maybe better quality, you don't know, but the fact that you have that choice is fundamentally important. Now, you brought up the relationship between Keir Starmer and the European Union and the agricultural standards. This is really important because a free trade agreement with the United States, one that is actually comprehensive. Now, again, we've got to be very careful about this. They could sign something that isn't very comprehensive and they call it a free trade agreement that doesn't really have much of an impact on us at all. But if we were to have something where we see agricultural goods being able to be traded, that would mean that we would have to deviate from the very, very rigorous and ultimately unnecessarily stringent standards that the European Union have set. Now, the only real point of caution here is what it does for Northern Ireland. That's a bit of a question of where we have to do those checks and those standards as well. But the fundamental thing is the government shouldn't be deciding what goods are good enough for British people. The British people should be able to decide, and they decide at the supermarket. They decide when they go and do their shopping.
I agree. I think we're all very price sensitive at the moment. Let me just ask you finally, if I may, about this headline. Allah sees everything. Gaza groups tell Muslims who to vote for. A campaign video which declares that Allah sees everything suggests which county council candidates voters in Wickham should support based on whether they will back a boycott of Israeli goods. I was absolutely horrified when I read this. This reference to Allah risks raising concerns that voters are being subjected to undue spiritual interference. That is a criminal offence in law.
It is a criminal offence. This is actually really interesting. It's something I've been trying to do a bit more research on recently. I come from a Muslim family, and I really am quite passionate about the idea that the sort of reformist Muslims, the more moderate Muslims that are sort of propagating those ideas in the UK, we basically don't have any. I mean, there's a guy that I'm interviewing next week called Mustafa Akyol, who's from the Cato Institute in DC, and he talks about the idea that, he wrote a book called Why as a Muslim I Defend Liberty, and I think it's a really, really important book if you're interested in the relationship between Islam and the West. There are sects of Islam that are absolutely compatible with Western values, and you see this with just the way in which Muslims practice time and time again. However, there is a huge problem in the UK specifically, and I don't know why it is in the UK. The Americans don't have this problem. In the UK, with sectarianism and very, very radical strands of Islam, I think we can call it political Islam or Islamism, where it is resulting in sectarian level voting. And this is just one example of this. Now, you're absolutely right. It is illegal to try and use this kind of religious scaremongering in order to try and get people to vote a certain way. But the fact that it is even being considered, the fact that it's being seen as effective, is yet again proof that we have a problem with political Islam and sectarian voting in this country.
I agree. I mean, look, I've seen it myself. I've seen block voting before we brought in voter ID. I've seen swathes of envelopes being carried by one particular man, which clearly represented a whole community where they were, let's just say, encouraged to vote a certain way.
It is really awful. I hope I could do my bit by promoting. So I'm interviewing Mustafa Akyol next week, and I'll hopefully that'll be doing my bit. Maybe we should get him on to talk about.
We should.
All of this. He'll be in the UK next week. I think it'll be really interesting because the idea that there are interpretations of Islam that are compatible with Western values, and those should be propagated, because there are so many Muslims across the UK that have never discovered this kind of more liberal interpretation of Islam, which, by the way, is exactly what happened to Christianity. If you take the Bible and Quran and take them at literally face value, there aren't that many differences in terms of the modernity of those texts. Of course, they're incredibly old, but it's the interpretation of it. Christian values in this country are absolutely beautifully practiced, and it means that people show tolerance with one another. It means that we do love thy neighbour. Within Islam, there seems to be a problem where, in the UK specifically, I don't know why it's a specific problem here and across Europe, I suppose, with a very very, very radical interpretation of Islam, and that is what is basically the majority. And I hope that we can do something about that and ensure that we're actually reducing that level and ensuring that people feel as though they have a choice to actually interpret the faith in a more liberal and Western compatible way. This particular example is really quite worrying. I also don't understand why the Palestine issue is so important to so many of these people. I understand that the feeling that there is a war going on, that there are children dying, is really, really quite heartbreaking. But the fact that it is so permissible and so permanent within British politics, the fact that literally members of parliament have won elections, beat the majority parties, the Conservatives and Labour, purely on this Free Palestine policy, if you can even call it that, is absolutely fascinating to me. And it really does kind of take into consideration the fact that there is this sectarian voting. And for some reason, this particular issue seems to ignite so much emotion and passion in so many people across the country.
Reem, very well said indeed. In fact, there are a couple of articles which I'll save for the weekend. Britain is now the heartland of Islamic extremism, and also the bin strikes which are going on in Birmingham, which there is no end in sight. They're plotting a new pro-Palestine party. Now, I would suggest to them they empty the bins instead of concentrating on global affairs. Reem, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. That's Reem Ibrahim, Communications Officer at the Institute for Economic Affairs. After the break, I want to talk about drivers who are older, because I'm asking a question this afternoon about a really important story, actually, which is the eyesight rules for motorists unsafe. This is based on a coroner's report. This is an inquest into the deaths of 4 people killed by drivers with failing eyesight. It's essentially found that enforcement of visual legal standards for motorists is ineffective and unsafe. There is a problem here, which is that if you take away the ability to drive from elderly people, particularly in rural communities, they will be isolated and stranded. So then the question becomes, what do we do? Who should enforce the eyesight? At the moment, what you have to do is self-report to the DVLA and say, look, I can't actually see very much, and therefore you lose your licence. I want to talk about that after this break. I'm going to talk to Rob Hurd, who's chair and founder of the Older Drivers Forum. Also, keep your messages coming in, please. I'm asking about the Supreme Court ruling. How can we be sensitive to trans people in light of the ruling from the Supreme Court? This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Lots of messages coming in. David, please tell your guest Reem it doesn't happen in the USA because they will not tolerate such religious behaviour, in particularly Islamic interference, whereas here in government, our government are weak. They're afraid to upset and lose the Muslim vote. As I say, I want to talk about that over the weekend as well. Joanna in Salisbury. Hi, David. Why is everybody afraid of chlorinated chicken, which we have in water on salad and so on? Brilliant point. Brilliant point. Of course, the bag salads are all washed in chlorinated water. I find it ridiculous when the UK is now feeding cattle an unnatural medication to stop them from producing methane. Oh, well done, Ed Miliband. A process of nature, and they're not concerned about that, but they are concerned about chlorinated chicken. I lived in the States for many years. I found the meat to be extremely good quality, for what it's worth. David, I was in the supermarket and I checked where the tomatoes were from. They were from the Netherlands. Thankfully, I located some grown in the UK. But to think we have to import a tomato, I agree. There again, we're putting solar panels, aren't we, on prime agricultural land, which is completely nuts. David, Jeff Phillips, of course, Keir Starmer wants us back in the EU, as once back under Brussels rule, Starmer and the rest of the political Ramonas will be paid for doing nothing, as all decisions are made by the Euro MPs. That's why they don't know what they're doing, because once we came out of the European Parliament, we actually hadn't got anyone with experience of running the country. The best option would be to revamp the original common market so trade between countries can be easier and we can rule ourselves out. It's interesting, isn't it? The EU has evolved from this kind of peace-preserving free trade bloc, which was its ideal, and that's why it was set up, into some sort of regulatory superpower. Thank you for this one. No name on it. I'm a trans. I had an operation 25 years ago. I live a quiet life, not bothering anyone. I have used male toilets in the past and I've been viciously attacked. This ruling has made it very dangerous for genuine trans people. So, thank you for that. I am saying, how are we now sensitively going to provide support for trans people? Surely what this does, though, is helps you, because you then don't have to use a male toilet where you may feel threatened. You then have a private space of your own, because the public sector bodies and private companies are going to have to make sure they live within the letter of the law. Do get back in touch, actually. I'm really keen to talk to you as well about what this means for you, this ruling from the Supreme Court. Let's move on and talk about this, because it's actually a very important story. An inquest into the deaths of 4 people killed by drivers with failing eyesight has found enforcement of visual legal standards for motorists is ineffective and unsafe. This is the senior coroner for Lancashire, Dr. James Adley. He sent a report to Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander to say action must be taken to prevent future deaths. He labelled the licensing system as the laxest in Europe, and he pointed out the UK was one of only 3 countries to rely upon self-reporting of visual conditions affecting the ability to drive. He said it's also very concerning the UK was the only European country to issue licences without visual checks for a continuous period up to the age of 70. There are some shocking examples of accidents that have happened. Mrs Cunningham, Mrs Folds, this is Marie Cunningham, 79, Grace Folds, 85. They were struck by Glyn Jones, 68, in his Audi A3 as they crossed the road in Southport in Merseyside in 2021. He was aware, the driver Jones, before the collision, that his sight was insufficient to meet the minimum requirement. He failed to declare it to the Driving and Vehicle Licensing Agency. He was jailed for 7 years and 4 months. At the sentencing, and this is really shocking, he couldn't actually see the steering wheel clearly, and yet he got behind the wheel of a car. There's another case here as well. This is Peter Westwell, 80, who was hit by Neil Pemberton, 81, as he crossed the road in Lango near Blackburn in 2022. Pemberton was jailed for 32 months. He had a long history of eye disease and was informed on several occasions by different clinicians he should not drive. According to the inquest, he did not declare it to the DVLA. And another case here as well. This is about Anne Ferguson, 75. She died when she was struck by a van driven by Vernon Law, 72, in Rochdale. He had cataracts in both eyes. He lied to an optometrist and he said he didn't drive, but he did drive. He was jailed for 4 years. And of course, the real travesty here is that he could have had those cataracts operated on and then could have had his licence back. Well, joining me now is Rob Hurd, chair and founder of the Older Drivers Forum. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, David.
I think this is a really complex issue because medically, clearly I'm a medic by training. It is really important that you have very good eyesight so that you can drive on the road so you don't put other people's lives and your own life in danger. At the same time, relying on self-reporting is a nonsense because people will try and cling on to their licence as long as they can. And this isn't just actually about cataracts or visual impairment. I'm taking examples like epilepsy, for example. If you have repeated seizures or seizures at all, you have to declare it to the DVLA and then it stops you from driving. Then I completely get that for older people, having the ability to drive and to be mobile, particularly in a rural community where there are no buses and no public transport, is your only means of going to the shop or actually keeping sane by talking to people.
Yeah, it is a really, it's kind of two subjects in a way, though, because we have to make sure that we have suitable vision for driving. Without that, we end up being a danger to ourselves and others on the road. And we know all motorists wouldn't want to cause a death of someone else on the road. But we know that the current eyesight situation is incorrect. It needs to be rectified. This self-certification, we can see exactly from that inquest, does not work. We need a compulsory eyesight testing, at least at the age of 70 and every renewal thereafter. But genuinely, I think that we should have it at licence application from 17 years of age and every 10 years when we do that photo card driving licence to get an optician's test, because it's a great way of picking up medical conditions early so they can be treated early, but also 90% of driving is visual, so we need good vision to be able to see down the road.
What about physical checks?
Now, physical checks, yes. So if you've got an underlying medical condition that may affect your ability to drive, then we are very much signposting people to a driving mobility centre to undertake cognitive and physical abilities on their driving. That's something that we as an organisation are very much working in partnership with driving mobility to try and steer that way of making sure people don't become complacent about their abilities when driving. But like you said, Mark, there is this situation that some people will continue driving even when they know that their sight is defective because they feel that's their only way of getting around. Now, yes, I can see that being a difficult situation, but like I have to say, we have to make sure all of us are safe on the road. There will be a day that we all have to retire from driving. And, you know, we have to just make sure we have regular checks to know when is the to retire from driving. But when we do retire, it isn't actually the end of everything. In fact, even if we live in rural environments, there is an organisation, Driving Mobility, run a scheme called Hubs Mobility Service, which is where you can be signposted and have a free conversation with a member of staff who specialises in coming up with a travel plan about getting you around without the use of a car. And we've had some really great feedback from that, where many people who used to travel by themselves in a car, now suddenly they may be using community transport schemes or other ways of getting around, or relying on friends and neighbours, actually said my life's far more fulfilling as a result of it, because people know I'm not driving, so they're picking me up, taking me, and actually I've met new friends as a result of this, and my life is much more fulfilling. So even though it does seem like the end of the world by stopping driving at some point, which will happen to us all, actually it can be a positive as well.
So how would that work exactly? If you lived in a rural community and you don't have any neighbours, and that happens a great deal where I live, where you are literally spread out, and you contact this organisation, how would they give you a bespoke travel plan if you live in the back end and beyond?
Yeah, so they've done research to lots of different organisations that cover all over the area. So we've got 20 mobility services covering the whole of the UK, and each one of them has outreach centres, and they've got a member of staff who's researched what's available in those different areas, from community transport schemes, which actually many of us don't know they exist, but they actually cover a lot of those rural environments as well. And so I'd always say to people, it's about looking at that. But thinking also what we do recommend with people as we do get older is about planning to retire from driving. And some of that actually might mean, do you know what, I need to move into town a little bit more. I need to know when I can't drive anymore, there is a public service there to use. I could walk to the shop or something like that. It's about planning as we get older to make sure that we are in the right environment for our needs.
Do you think there is a role here for incentivising older people to downsize? Because at the moment, older people are often sitting in big houses. They're scared of downsizing. The economic downside of downsizing is significant, and so there is no incentive at all.
Yeah, I think there is an incentive needed to encourage people to downsize, especially in planning for that retirement from driving or when their mobility may not be as good as it used to be. It is a really important thing to look after. We have an ageing population. We are a massive ageing population, and older drivers is increasing by 250,000 every year. It's out-aging or outgrowing any other age group that exists really at the end of the day. And it's not saying that all older drivers are dangerous. Far from it. The vast majority are perfectly safe, but we know there's a small minority who will continue driving knowing that they're no longer safe on the road.
So just finally, your advice to older people who are worried their eyesight maybe isn't quite what it should be?
Yes, my advice is go and get an eyesight test with an optician. It's a really great way on just making sure, and in fact that worry about not being right, quite often a lot of the things they can treat. A lot of the times they may be able to do corrective surgery, like we talked about that gentleman with the 2 cataracts. Could have had an operation and he would have been able to carry on driving perfectly safely. People are often scared about what it actually is, but actually when they go to the optician, you'll get a lot of help and support to help you.
Rob, really good to talk to you. Thank you for your time on this Good Friday. Rob Hurd, their chair and founder of the Older Drivers Forum. Do get in touch, please, 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talking your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well. I'll take some calls after the break as well. Lots coming in on net zero as well, as John Swinney saying Nigel Farage getting into number 10 and being Prime Minister would be a disgrace and would actually destroy the United Kingdom. I think that's a bit rich coming from him. Let me know your thoughts, please, on all of the above. This is Talk.
We've gone to those talks with a number of ways that this dispute can be resolved. Unfortunately, the council turned up with nothing.
Is there an offer for another meeting?
Well, the council have said that they'll meet us on Wednesday of next week. Our position...
Next week?
There you go. Exactly, Mike. Which is why my position is that we are ready to meet. And for those of us who are old enough to remember the Martini advert, anytime, any place, anywhere.
Yeah.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. On the subject of older drivers, so many messages coming in. Pamela Grace Mitchison, good afternoon to you. Hi, David. Regarding older drivers, who on earth wants to be at the mercy of relying on community transport? In my opinion, it's a step towards losing independence and lack of control. The purpose of having a car is being spontaneous as well as practical. Yes, I understand, but what happens if you can't see? Boris, my old man is in his 80s and will not give up driving despite having terrible eyesight, but as long as no check is carried out, he will continue to lie on his application. I've seen it. I've seen it myself, and it's illegal. Cliff in Berkshire, as more and more people are forced to work further and further into their old age, do you think we'll see more and more cases of those with declining eyesight continuing to drive, with more accidents as a result? Sharon in Wigan, good afternoon to you. Everything is such hard work in the UK. It's not about taking a driving test every 5 years. It's about having an eye test every 2 years. If you don't, you can't drive. It's that simple. Deb, the problem is it's left to self-assessment, exactly, on your driving licence renewal regarding eyesight. It should be a proper sight test at the doctor's or the pharmacy. My father-in-law cannot see the end of his nose and blatantly lied on his renewal notice. If they looked at the damage to his car, where every panel has a scrap or dent, he wouldn't get as far as an eye test. Crikey. Keep those messages coming in, please. The law is really straightforward. So if you have an eye test and it says you can't drive, the onus is on you. You then have to go to the DVLA and tell them. Equally, if you have a seizure, you have to tell the DVLA. Now, you may choose not to tell them. And then if you don't tell the DVLA, they don't know. So you keep your licence. If you have had the seizure and you inform the DVLA, you lose your licence for a year until you are 12 months seizure free. It's an emotive story, that. Talking of another emotive story, Julie is on the line from Basildon. Good afternoon.
Hello, David. How are you?
Thank you so much for calling in, because you were the lady who sent in the message earlier that I asked you to get in touch. So tell me about your feelings given the Supreme Court ruling.
I'm okay with the ruling. I do believe, and I've always believed, that women should have their safe spaces.
And you're, sorry, just to clarify, you're a trans woman?
I am a trans female, yeah.
Yes.
I transitioned 25 years ago.
Wow.
And I've been living very happily ever since. No problems with female toilets. I have avoided swimming pools, changing rooms, gyms, etc. Showing a bit of respect to women and all that sort of thing. And I thought I'd share an experience of once when I did use a male toilet. I was viciously attacked and hospitalised after people realised.
Hospitalised?
Yeah, I was head-butted, broken nose, had to go to hospital. And I think that forcing me now to go into a male toilet is putting me at risk.
And that was the point I was trying to make earlier, which is actually the law provides framework now. How would you feel if there were dedicated changing rooms or toilets for trans people, which companies and organisations have to provide by law?
Yeah, no problem whatsoever. No problem with it whatsoever. I totally respect females and their safe space, and I do understand a lot of it. I had an operation a long time ago, and I speak for people that have gone through the operation and gone through what I went through. I think that a lot of this transgender stuff these days, with talking about women with penises, I I don't actually get that idea of it. I think that's a totally wrong idea.
Do you feel that, and thank you for sharing your story, do you feel that actually the whole subject has been hijacked because what you're showing is actually you have respect for women, that you're also trying to protect yourself? I think that the law actually now should be on your side to protect you.
Yeah, I think that while in solving one problem, it's just created another problem. It has now put people like me at risk of transphobia. Now people are going to be becoming brave and challenging us, and it's put.
Oh, that's
it's
interesting.
turned my world upside down, really, because I've lived for 25 years. I'm still married to my wife. I have kids. I have grandchildren. I have everything. And I have a wonderful life, and it's turned it into turmoil. I went out this morning, and I was a nervous wreck.
How do you see it sort of evolving from here? Because once the ruling happens, that's one thing, but then institutions have to catch up.
Yeah, it puts my job now. My job is in question now.
Is it?
I work for the NHS.
Right.
And now they're changing. They're going to change the rulings on going into a hospital, going into a male ward. Mentally, that is freaking me out.
Right. And I assume, therefore, what you need to do is to have a conversation with your employer.
Yeah. But I'm very careful of where I go anyway. Try not to upset people and all that kind of thing. I think that what now should be done is help with. We used to be called transsexuals.
Yes.
And the people now saying they're transgendered and they're females were basically called transvestites.
Yeah,
and it all seems
right.
to have changed. It all seems to have changed where transvestites used to have their own space that they went to, clubs, etc., and things like that. Now they're coming out into the mainstream, and I do think that's caused a lot of problems.
That's so interesting. Very quickly, sorry, time is time. Do you think organisations like Stonewall have actually made the problem worse?
I do. I think a lot of people have bought into this new transgender stuff, and I said a long time ago, this is basically going to come back and bite us.
Yeah.
And it has, and it's made me very fearful.
Julie, thank you so much for your bravery this afternoon, for calling in. I really, really do appreciate it, and I really hope what happens now is the framework is there so that actually institutions and organisations will now protect you so that your job is safe and you have safe spaces to go to as well. Time for a break. After the break, I want to talk about freedom of speech in this country. There are a couple of cases I need to talk about. You will be pretty shocked. This is Talk.
the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon, just after 3 o'clock now on Friday, Good Friday, April the 18th. Happy Easter to all of you around the country. I'm David Bull. I'm in for Ian Collins this afternoon. Well, coming up this hour, rapists can no longer identify as women under the Supreme Court's landmark ruling, but trans activists have vowed to defy the ruling, continuing to use single-sex toilets whilst claiming blatant discrimination. Meanwhile, an employment tribunal has ruled that asking a black person, "What are you smoking?" is racist, awarding £35,000 to a black worker who was subjected to the remark after an alleged error. And millions of commuters face travel disruption. Of course they do. It's the Easter getaway. Of course it begins with Network Rail carrying out over 300 engineering projects across Britain, and an estimated, wait for this, 20 million people are set to hit the roads today. Do call, leave a message, 0344 499 1000, text the word TALK, and your message to 87222. You can also message us on X as well, at talkTV. Well, a very good afternoon to you. So many messages coming in. David, this is Linda. I know reform won't be able to mend our country right away. This is based on John Swinney saying that Nigel Farage will be Prime Minister and will be incredibly divisive and destroy the fabric of the United Kingdom. David, I know reform won't mend our country right away, but I do have faith that Nigel and reform, who will never do anything to damage my country, unlike Labour, who just want to decimate and destroy Britain. This is John in Wallington. Good afternoon, one of our regulars. Good afternoon, John. Swinney has got a cheek, saying Nigel Farage is bad for Britain. Swinney, along with the Tories and Labour, are running scared because reform are going from strength to strength. Lots of others about net zero as well. And also, we talked in the last hour about driving. Saying that actually you do need to get your eyes tested as you get older, and you need to declare your medical status to the DVLA. If they tell you your eyesight is not very good and you can't see past the end of the nose, or that particular case I talked about where you can't actually see the steering wheel, then you shouldn't be behind the wheel of a car. This is Michelle. Hi, David. Going back to when my grandparents were alive 25 years ago, my granddad was in his 70s and a very safe, proud driver. When my late father was a young man, he had a spicy Ford Cortina. My granddad was absolutely hooked on borrowing it. But my nana would say, slow down. Very good. Like that. Francis from Wilton. Link schemes, which we talked about as well. I've never heard of them, actually. Link schemes are drivers in a community who support the less able to appointments and more. Brilliant. It's a godsend to me. Francis, thank you for that, enlightening us on that. Katie in York, good afternoon. It's not just bad eyesight that causes problems on the roads. It's people who blatantly disregard the rules of the road. Oh, I want to talk about this. I think the standard of driving in this country is appalling. So she goes on to say, people who blatantly disregard the rules of the road, people who can't judge the size of their own vehicle. Plus, don't older people get free bus passes? I understand not every village has bus routes, but most do. You haven't been to my village. Well, I do have a bus, actually. I think we get 2 a day. Most do, so why are the elderly not using them? Because they're not actually very useful. Then on the subject of the ruling from the Supreme Court, Louise says, David, why can't we just have unisex single toilets? Most cafes, small restaurants, etc. only have one toilet. I'm sure you could partition them, most toilets, for a single unisex cubicle as well. And this is absolutely right. Joanna in Salisbury. Hi, David. Too many people are terrified of being trapped in their homes and losing their independence. If an elderly person lives in a rural setting, pensions aren't enough to travel everywhere by taxis, and bus services are sparse. I agree totally with all of that. Get in touch, please. I'm really keen to hear your views. That brilliant call we had earlier about the trans ruling, let me know your thoughts on that as well. I want to talk about freedom of speech. It's a pet subject of mine now. And I often think freedom of speech is under attack. In fact, weirdly, I was talking to Nigel Farage yesterday about this, saying that even in the pub, which is basically the people's parliament, where you go and sit down and have a pint and you talk about what's on your mind, even that seems to be under threat, because you've got people earwigging and then saying you don't like what you're saying. Well, if you don't allow people to express their views, then it will drive views underground, and then you end up in a very dysfunctional and dystopian society. Now, this is an article based on an employment judge's ruling. Asking a black person, what are you smoking, is racist, according to an employment tribunal. This is the employment judge, Rachel Weatherspoon, said any reasonable person would be offended by the remark, excuse me, due to the stereotypical view of a black person with dreadlocks smoking drugs. What? Her ruling came in the case of Gemma Spencer, a black administrator who sued her employers for race discrimination and harassment after she was dismissed. The admin worker told a panel she had her hair in braids when director Mark Kelly asked her line manager if she'd been smoking something after they perceived she had made an error at work. She then accused him of racism. He then said in no way meant to make some remark about her being a Rastafarian. Bosses said she was being hypersensitive, had warped the impact the phrase had on her. That was rejected by the judge, Judge Weatherspoon, excuse me, who said the comment was unwanted conduct which violated the dignity of Miss Spencer, who was awarded, wait for this, $35,109 in compensation. Joining me now is Will Jones, editor of the Daily Sceptic. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David.
What are you thinking about? This seems extraordinary to me.
Yeah, it's completely extraordinary. The first thing we've got to say is it is completely absurd to claim that asking a black person, what are you smoking, is racist. Completely absurd. Everybody knows, any reasonable person knows, as the judge might say but didn't say, any reasonable person knows that it's a common vernacular phrase. It means you've made a silly mistake.
Yes.
You've made a basic error of judgment. It's got no race connotations whatsoever, and the very idea that it is should never have got that far, and it should certainly not have been agreed to that stereotype by the judge. In fact, we might say that that stereotype that the judge is appealing to there, the judge is herself appealing to that, invoking that stereotype in order to draw that conclusion. And as the defendant said, that stereotype was in no way in his mind at the time, but clearly it was in the judge's mind. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that doesn't this make a complete nonsense of Labour's claim that their employment rights bill is not going to create a banter ban? They've claimed that this clause 20 of the employment rights bill is not going to create a banter ban in pubs and in hospitality venues, in restaurants, because they say that no, we're not going to enforce this idea of of staff being harassed by overhearing people's private conversations. No, you'll still be allowed to do that. That's what they claim. But doesn't this just show this employment rights tribunal that under employment law, many judges, this one is not untypical unfortunately, will consider such trivialities as saying, what are you smoking, to constitute racial discrimination and award extraordinary sums of compensation for these throwaway phrases? And doesn't that just show that that's how these harassment laws are already being interpreted, and that we can expect more of the same under Labour's banter ban, which we need to be reminded, of course, the Labour minister Lillian Greenwood was on the radio just this week defending, saying, she's again said, oh no, don't worry, you'll still be able to have your private conversations, she said, but as long as, and here's the clincher, as long as people aren't made to feel unsafe by your private conversations. Oh, well, thank you very much, Lillian. That's also awfully kind of you to allow us to have our private conversations in pubs.
The whole thing is absolutely extraordinary. I mean, certainly we work in a very close team here. I am known to say things that might be slightly outrageous, but it's done in tone. There's tonality behind it, because the whole point is that actually you use joking and expressions. It's part of common parlance, and actually, in many senses, it brings the team together.
Absolutely. Banter plays a really important role. Humour and all this and joking around plays a really important role in personal relations. But you sometimes think that the people who write these rules, these DEI speech codes that have come to tyrannize workplaces across the country with hyperactive HR departments, that they seem to be written by people who have no understanding of human relationships and human conversation and just how people get along with each other, and instead just seek to bring identity politics and all these protected characteristics and all this discrimination and harassment laws, and just to really lay them on thick and just completely smother all human humour and interaction and relationships, and just completely poison workplaces. And now Labour is intent on bringing that poison into what is one of the last bastions of free speech, pubs and hospitality venues.
Do you think there's an age gap here? Because it strikes me that people who are older, like me, we've grown up getting used to that kind of banter and camaraderie and all that. And actually with younger people, you do have to be a bit careful sometimes, because they will look at you strangely and think that you're actually being literal in what you're saying. But then equally, culturally, they need to understand that, because otherwise they don't get very far in the workplace.
Absolutely, but of course, the last 5 years, many of them have not been going into the workplace. Part of the problem after the pandemic. Too many of them have not been going in and experiencing real workplaces. They've gone straight from educational settings to unemployment or working from home. But I do think young people are their own worst enemy here, because actually young people are often the first to use banter, to use back and forth humour, to speak first and think later. You know, we've all been young. And we all remember what that's like. But there's now this very, very strong, driven I think by social media to a large extent, this very, very strong, censorious, authoritarian streak where they just seem to delight and relish in spotting people's infractions of very precise speech codes, woke speech codes, and coming down as hard as they can. I think to some extent that's the kind of that ganging up and that mob mentality that people have, and I think it makes people feel powerful that they can all gang up together on Twitter or X on social media and take people down, and it helps them to feel powerful. But they're their own worst enemy, because young people like to have banter and humour as much as the rest of us, but they do seem to be completely obsessed, many of them, too many of them, with trying to take people down for wrongthink.
I think you're absolutely right about the fact that many of these young people didn't go to work, they was left at home. But also, in universities, I'm deeply worried about the lack of freedom of speech. The fact is you can't actually say what you think anymore. I mean, I went to a rugby-playing medical school. People were pretty vociferous about what they thought back then. It moves us to this other article this morning. A philosopher opposed to mass migration has been banned from entering Britain. I mean, this is absolutely bonkers. He's a French novelist. He's an award-winning, as far as I can understand, and very, very prolific novelist, Renaud Camus. He was barred from travelling to the UK because he wants to talk about immigration, the pace of immigration change in this country across Europe. He says unchecked immigration will lead to demographic replacement of Europe's indigenous populations. I think pretty much all of us would agree with that. The Home Office, oh no, you can't come in. We'll let everyone else in, but you can't come in because we're not going to give you an ETA, the electronic travel authorisation. Your presence in the UK is not considered to be conducive to the public good. This is at the same time we're seeing pro-Palestinian marches, we're seeing the rise of Islamist radicals. I mean, this is utterly nuts.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? Think of all the people that we don't want coming into this country with extreme views, violent views, the terrorists and criminals that are coming in under the radar on the boats, coming into this country, and then we try and get rid of them and try and deport them. And there's this string of cases that the newspapers are reporting on at the moment of showing us how tribunals are using human rights law, or abusing human rights law, judges, activist judges, who are preventing deportation of very unsavoury and unwelcome characters from this country because of their criminal behaviour and extreme violent views. And yet here we have a prolific French philosopher who takes a particular line on immigration and says that immigration into Europe is going too fast, and that needs to be looked at. A sentiment very widely shared, as we know, and yet here we have the Home Office telling him that he's not welcome in England. I mean, this is free speech again. I mean, wherever someone stands on those issues, we should believe in free speech as Western liberal democracies, that we believe that we need to hear people's viewpoints. If people are wrong, then they need to be heard, and then other people can explain why they think they're wrong. Or if they're right, then it needs to be heard as well. But we need to hear views, not suppress them and censor them, especially views that will resonate with large numbers of the public. And of course, but this is part of a major trend, as the US, the new Trump administration, has been pointing out across Europe. It's almost always the right or conservative viewpoints that are being suppressed. We've even seen elections being cancelled by activist judiciary. We've had Marine Le Pen being excluded on what seems like a relative triviality, something that everyone seems to do in the European Parliament, but on this technicality, being excluded, the front runner, the lead opposition, a politician being excluded from the French election. I mean, these are extraordinary times, and it's always one way, isn't it? It's always the right so-called populism, and that's because they're afraid. I think the ruling class is afraid of the fact that there is a large groundswell of opposition to their policies they've been pursuing for the last several decades, particularly around immigration, and they want to suppress it. They want
the ridiculous thing here is this is what people... I mean, I go around the country a lot. This is what people are saying all the time. They do not recognise the country. We have uncontrolled mass migration into this country. It is putting massive strain. You've got 10 million more people in this country. You can't see a GP. You can't actually get a house. You can't do anything because the country is changing beyond belief, and it's far too quickly. We've always relied on immigration in this country. It's just the pace of immigration which is just affecting people's lives so dramatically.
Yes, the rate of immigration, especially since the 90s and the Blair government, has, as you said, has been extraordinary. And of course, under the Conservatives, every election since I believe I read this week, since the 1970s, every parliament, every government coming into power has promised to reduce migration, and the opposite has happened. That especially happened with the Conservatives, which is why, of course, they're so unpopular right now, and the rise of reform, because we keep seeing these promises being broken, and the borders not being controlled, both illegal and legal immigration. That is a very key issue that's got very strong feelings among the population, and the politicians are letting the electorate down again and again on it.
How do you see this ending?
Well, on my optimistic days, David, I see a sea change, and I see politicians actually getting their act together. We see countries like Denmark, like Sweden, and now that under Trump in America, actually trying to get and actually succeeding in getting on top of these issues, Australia as well, and actually having the political will to put the policies in place. Because at the end of the day, these things, they keep claiming these things are impossible, but they're not impossible. Countries are doing them, and they just need to do them. So on my more optimistic days, I see the politicians actually getting their act together and getting this done, and looking, see what's happening, what's working in other countries like Denmark, like Sweden, like America and Australia, and making those things happen here. And the big problem we've got here, though, of course, is the courts. We have a very, very independent court system with a lot of judges who seem to just be set on trying to undermine sensible immigration policy and the government's will. So that's also an issue that needs to be grasped and dealt with. Tricky because of the independence of the judiciary, but they do need to find. That's something they need to find a way. But in my optimistic days, I do hope and pray that politicians are actually going to get their act together.
I do too. Will, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. Will Jones, editor of the Daily Sceptic. Brian says, I used to say Nigel Farage was the best Prime Minister we never had. Well, now it looks likely I'm going to get my wish. But what a mess he's going to inherit. Let's just hope there's something worth saving after Labour has decimated the country. One more. Alison. Hello, David. What a delight to see you, my little Easter bunny. Thank you. As a former cop, we tested eyesight at collisions, and people had to see a number plate from 20 metres away. So people can use a measure to see if they are legally permitted to drive, if they're willing to. Also, people need to know if they can drive with the medication they take. That's a brilliant point. It took a lot of persuasion to stop my late mother driving, as it's another chapter in the book of life that is finished. Ooh, that's very profound. Happy Easter, David, and happy Easter to you as well, Alison. We'll take a break. After the break, your calls, thoughts and messages. This is Talk.
Also engages directly with death, the thing we're all profoundly afraid of and don't really understand. And it's a bitter thing, and I much myself prefer the bitter and sad part of it because of the enormous power it has to make you think about what sort of world you live in, and to remind you that the evil which was abroad in the first century Holy Land is very, very similar to the evil which is abroad in today's world.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. We were talking about this chap, Renaud Camus, the French novelist, who was coming to the UK to talk about unchecked immigration leading to demographic replacement of Europe's indigenous populations. Now, the Home Office has decided he's a threat to the United Kingdom because he's talking about immigration, he's talking about encouraged mass migration, and they have refused to allow him into the country. Many of you commenting on this. Betty, good afternoon to you. Looking fab, Dr. D. Thank you very much. That's the only person, David, prevented from coming from France since Nelson tried to manage the channel. Very droll and right and pithy. David, Betty continues. The problem is all the left and pro-terror types are already coming in. They're coming in illegally. Well, you're right there, Betty. Now, David, this is Alice. Oh, this is Mark. So, David, you must have bad eyesight. Oh, don't start me that. As you're wearing glasses. So, if you were in Newcastle and about to travel home late at night or a weekend and you smash your glasses, would you try and drive home or stay until you get some new glasses? And don't say you always carry a spare pair, just stick to having one pair. Actually, it's much more complicated because I wear lenses so that I can see Dave there behind the glass. but I can't read these, you see. So now I have to wear these to see this, but now he's gone all blurry, which is much better. No, sorry. So it's more complicated, but if I don't have my lenses on my glasses, I can't drive because I can't see. So I wouldn't drive, actually. Now, my parents are both in their 80s, and my dad has finally admitted he can't see to drive anymore. So now my mum drives. Now my dad has to go with her because she can't actually remember where she's going. That's Phil in Portsmouth. That's so funny. This is Neil in Derby. That's really tickled me, actually. Lorry drivers have to have a medical every 5 years, including an eye test. So why do car drivers have to wait until they're 70? Very good point. David, if there's a 6-month waiting list for driving tests, how would you arrange eyesight tests? You ring in an optician. You go and get an eye test. Now, this is very pertinent. Katie in York, good afternoon. I like this one. It's not bad eyesight. It's about the problems on the road and the bad driving. I think the way we drive in this country is appalling. I've never seen such terrible driving, particularly people hogging the middle lane, and then when you try and overtake, they stick in that lane, and then you see the lorries down the A12, which is a terrible road anyway, going to East Anglia, where they sit there and do this, and, you know, they never pass each other. If you drive in Europe, they're pretty good. They're very hot on this, particularly in Spain. They overtake, you pull in. And if they don't, they're coming right up behind you. So I do think there is a role for re-education of the way that we drive in this country. Let's take a call. Laura Jane is in Hampshire. Good afternoon.
Hi there. It's just a bit weird that this topic came up about driving because some friends of mine came over to visit me from the South Coast, and she has taken herself out of driving a year ago. She has macular
degeneration. Yeah, so basically the back of the eye is degenerating, yeah.
Yes, and her husband, who's 80, drives, and he drives extremely well. And one of my best friends in the village, she never drives after dark because as soon as it's dusk, that's it.
Yeah.
And so, but my point is that it doesn't seem that the opticians in either of those cases have stepped in. I mean, macular degeneration, you'd have thought the optician would say, I'm afraid I've got to withdraw you. She's withdrawn herself because she knows she's not safe.
So you're right, but here's the thing. There is no legal duty or obligation on the optician to inform the DVLA.
Yeah, but then what is the problem? It's obvious, isn't it?
Well, quite. I agree with you. But let's take the case of epilepsy. So if you have a seizure and your neurologist says, look, you've had a seizure, you're now banned for a year and you cannot drive until you are a year seizure free, it is still up to the patient to tell the DVLA. Now, you may decide that you've had a fit, but you can't live without your car, so you carry on driving.
I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I pulled out of driving 20 years ago because I felt that my short-sightedness was certainly affecting me, and I just thought, this isn't safe for me or the children anymore.
Yes.
So, I stopped driving. It wasn't my optician who told me. I just knew that it was, unsafe. But it is extraordinary that on the continent it's much stricter.
Much stricter. But then they're much stricter about driving generally. I mean, certainly when I've spent time in Spain, the likelihood of being pulled over by the police, I would say, is much higher as well.
Yeah, no, that's true. But I mean, anyway, you should see some of the drivers in Hampshire because there's a lot of people over the age of in my village, and it's quite interesting.
I would agree with you. And in fact, I followed a very elderly driver who was going very slowly down a dual carriageway and another one that was on a country road doing about 5 miles an hour. And that in itself is very dangerous.
It's dangerous.
It's very dangerous.
I've taken to a tricycle, which is a huge, great sort of box. Ladies in London drive their school children in them, and I've got 4 dogs. So off we go in this huge box and cycle to our.
Is that like a motorbike, 3-wheel motorbike?
Well, it's 3-wheeled tricycle, but it's got an enormous box in the front. It's meant for children.
Oh, I see.
I mean, we're talking, big thing, and that's how we get about. And but the buses are not great. I can take a bus to Winchester at 11 o'clock, but I've got to wait till 2:45 to get a bus back.
Yes. And that's the problem, isn't it? So I think a lot of this also is about older people not giving up their independence. And of course, the public transport isn't there to support it. We heard that brilliant interview earlier about the community support that is there. But also, there is no incentive, and this is a big problem and no joined-up thinking for me, which is that older people who are living in houses that, quite frankly, are far too big for them, don't want to downsize for lots of reasons, which is they lose their independence. But also, there's no financial incentive to downsize.
No, and then we wonder why we've got a housing crisis. But, on another note, we have our second branch reform meeting next week, which I will cycle to because it'll be light enough at 7 o'clock. And all that's going along very nicely. And I feel very comfortable that all the troubles in the waters are going away because we're all just being sensible and getting on with, looking at what political side we want to be on without worrying about the infighting.
Can I just ask you about John Swinney's comment saying it looks likely that Nigel Farage is going to be Prime Minister and he will undo the fabric of the United Kingdom. He will fracture the United Kingdom, says John Swinney.
They're frightened. They're frightened of us. They're frightened.
Laura Jane, very good to talk to you this afternoon. I've got visions of you on your tricycle now. Laura Jane in Hampshire, thank you very much for that. Right, after the break, I'm going to be joined by the guru himself, Simon Calder, the travel correspondent for The Independent. Yes, it's Easter. Now, we're expecting 20 million people, apparently, to hit the roads today. That's going to be fun, isn't it? Also, lots of engineering works taking place. Simon knows all the details. We'll catch up with Simon after this break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. The time 3:34 on this Good Friday. Happy Easter to you. Lots of messages coming in about net zero. David, it's an absolute nonsense. We need to reduce the energy bills to attract business investment. We need to open coal mines and gas and oil wells to feed our needs. Our fields actually need to be returned to crop and animal production. This will lower carbon emissions by reducing imports of Danish bacon, New Zealand lamb and so on. To seed the plant, we need to develop and improve our forests and wild fields to help carbon capture and not build homes on them. How right you are. And of course, this article I mentioned earlier, Richard Tice, finding out that British coal could produce the coke to keep British Steel open. But the government doesn't seem to understand that. And of course, this is about an agenda which the government is pursuing. Keep those messages coming in, please. Also, after that rather brilliant call, a very brave call, actually, with the trans lady, I'm asking, how can we now be sensitive to trans people in this country, given the Supreme Court ruling? I actually think it's very welcome, but now it needs to be used in a very positive way. But it does clear up a complete mess, which various lobby groups have exploited to their own ends. Keep those messages coming in, please. Now, let's talk about Easter, shall we? Because it is the Easter getaway. You can expect jams on the roads, disruption on the railways, queues at the airports. Millions of Brits are jetting off. The Network Rail, the infrastructure company, are carrying out work on more than, wait for this, 300 projects between today and Easter Monday. Lines are being closed as a result. Euston, the UK's 10th busiest railway station, I was there yesterday, will have no services to or from Milton Keynes on Saturday and Sunday, reduced timetable on Good Friday. We've got work on the West Coast Main Line. You've got London Victoria affected. You've got 20 million people driving today, 18.5 million people hitting the roads tomorrow, another 18 million hitting on Easter Sunday, and another 18 million on Easter Monday. The RAC says the roads are going to be a mess. I'm paraphrasing. Simon Calder knows everything. Good afternoon, Simon.
Well, how nice to talk to you, David. I'm at London Luton Airport, which is actually seems to be doing all right today. We have got some long delays. The Bucharest flight is about 10 hours late on Wizz Air. But also, there's another one, American Airlines to Chicago from Heathrow. That's 12 hours late. But actually, most things are working all right. What I am seeing very definitely is this pattern of air traffic control staff shortages across Europe, meaning that it is very difficult for airlines to keep to time. You've almost certainly been there. You get up at silly o'clock, you get to the airport, your flight's supposed to be at 7. You're actually still sitting on the ground at 8 o'clock because the captain said, oh, we've got to wait for a slot, which is annoying, but at least you get there. But as the day wears on, here's what happens. You simply find that the airlines are getting later and later and later, and that can result in delays of several hours towards the end of the evening, and even at some airports not being able to fly at all because of curfews starting. So, yeah, air traffic control, staff shortage. We know that it is going to make about 1 in 3 flights significantly late. So if you're only delayed an hour, then I'd take that as a win, David.
Well, the thing that I hate, Simon, is when they make you board the plane, they don't turn on the aircon if it's hot, for example, because they don't want to use the fuel. And then you're sitting there like a sort of basted chicken for an hour before you take off.
Yes, and I'll tell you why they're doing that. That's because the pilot, he or she, is waiting, hoping that they might suddenly get an earlier slot to go. So if you take a very busy airport like Gatwick, for instance, where you've got dozens of planes waiting to take off, they will, the pilot might know that their slot is in 45 minutes' time, but they will deliberately get everybody on, all strapped in, and then tell them, and then say, well, obviously we're hoping for an improvement on that, and if another plane isn't ready, they can just sort of nip into that. But it's not a great feeling, and the airlines, of course, are absolutely furious because they don't want to be late. Their whole business plan, particularly the budget airlines, is based on the idea that you just keep those planes flying. If you've got lots of delays, that spells compensation or at least care costs for the passengers, and that feeds through to higher fares. So fairly difficult for a number of people today. That's out of Manchester, I've checked, Stansted, some of the flights here at Luton, and a bit at Gatwick. Heathrow actually doing quite well, as long as you're not on that Chicago flight.
Right. I don't know where you are, Simon. It's very noisy. Are you in the canteen there at Luton?
No, I'm not. I'm in a sort of lounge, but it is very convivial, I suppose.
Well, I suppose it's Good Friday.
In a good mood, aren't they?
Yes, they're in a very good mood. Now, let's talk about the roads.
It's also, it is also the busiest day of the year so far for aviation.
Oh, is that right? Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, talking of busy, the roads are pretty shambolic, I think. The M6, M5, A303, M25, we're talking about 20 million people hitting the roads. Go on, tell us the bad news.
Yeah, okay, but the bad news is probably if you are listening in your car now, then you have done what everybody else does, which is, if you've got a long journey, you get up maybe Good Friday a little bit later than usual, have a bit of breakfast, let's have another cup of tea, then you set off at 10 or 11, and that's when everybody else is doing it. You're also getting tangled up with some of the shopping traffic as well, perhaps around the big cities, and so it is quite messy. The recipe is for Easter. Start early or start late, or go on Easter Sunday. Actually, that's going to be a relatively quiet day. Otherwise, it's the usual old suspects. M25, particularly between M23 for Gatwick and going round clockwise to Heathrow, and then up to the M40 for Oxford and Birmingham. A303, beloved of many people in kind of London area, heading down to Devon and Cornwall, but unfortunately it gets all really snarled up around Stonehenge. And then the M5 also going to Devon and Cornwall, south from Birmingham and Bristol, and then the M6 really anywhere from Birmingham you can hit problems, but particularly around the M55 just by Preston, turn off for Blackpool, and the turn offs for the Lakes. But jams will pop up anywhere, particularly if it's minor collisions. Suddenly everything snarls up really badly.
And now National Highways is removing roadworks from 1,127 miles of motorways and major A roads, apparently. They say, this is Heidi Alexander, the Transport Secretary, saying cutting journey times and saving drivers money every year is part of plan for change. Here we go, wheeling that out again. Whatever happened to the National Cone Hotline? 0345, something like that.
Okay, yeah, that was something that John Major, remember him, did in the 1992 to 97 Parliament, and it didn't. I don't think anybody actually ever phoned it, at least not to report overrun it. Did you? Yeah. Okay. Did it do any good?
No.
Younger listeners, even younger than you, David, need to know that there was sort of quite a lot of fuss of nothing happening. So lanes would be blocked off and nothing would be going on. And you were supposed to phone this number and say, hey, on my motorway, they've had cones there for 3 weeks and I haven't seen a single person there. Didn't really take off. But of course you can at least drive without too many roadworks this Easter, unlike getting the train. And at the same time as the Department for Transport said we're lifting all these roadworks, they also said, and because we own Network Rail, we're putting in loads of railway engineering projects. And exactly as you say, London Euston Station closed on Saturday, Sunday and Monday, and you can still get there and back, but you need to get a rail replacement bus between Milton Keynes and Bedford.
My heart sinks just hearing those words.
Yes, it is. It is fairly dismal. But the ferries, if I can cover those.
Yes.
For the first time today, during the whole Easter school holidays, we saw some queues up to about sort of 90 minutes at Dover. The big problem is actually going to be coming back Saturday, Sunday, Monday, because if you're coming back from Calais into Dover, you do the French and the British border checks before you get on the ferry. And we have had over the last weekend queues of up to 90 minutes there, and I think that could increase because, of course, everybody has been off maybe skiing or down to the south of France or whatever. They're all converging on Calais. They're all going to want to come back, and that means because we have to have our passports stamped, that there will be hold-ups coming back, but not really much you can do there except, again, don't go for the middle of the day, go for 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, crikey. Now, also, anything else just in terms of that? I was just looking at where people are jetting off to, the most common destinations. Some of them look quite nice.
Well, some of them do. One of the absolutely by far the top destination is Dublin, and you might be thinking, well, a nice city, why is everyone going there? Well, of course it's not. It's actually lots and lots of people, Irish people who are living in Great Britain, who are just flying in there to see family, friends or whatever. There are some tourists, of course, but second place Amsterdam, which is interesting. It is a proper city break destination, very exciting. Also a connection point for KLM going on to various other places, and after that it's the good old Spanish airports, so Malaga, Alicante and Palma. And in 6th place, Dubai, the only long-haul destination in the whole top 10.
Now, don't be rude about Alicante. Let me tell you, it's a lovely town.
I'm not. No, a beautiful town and very close to lovely Benidorm as well, which I'm very fond of.
I'm
also.
very fond as well, by the way, Simon. I
Yeah.
can see you in Benidorm, actually.
Oh, well, I will. I have my Speedos packed for you, David.
Excellent, excellent. Well, there's a thought, Simon. Anything else for us this afternoon?
Yeah, yes, I do. Was it Laura Jane you were talking to just before 1:30? Okay, because she was talking about, we got one bus at 10 o'clock, you have to wait till 4 o'clock for the next
got
one.
a tricycle.
Well, can I... Yes, exactly. I've seen yours as well, David. But what you need to do is have organised hitchhiking, and that works really well. They do it lots in
based
France.
in Switzerland?
No. But here's what they do: you have a you register, and you have in each village a place where people go and stand. And because you've got cars going out of the village every couple of minutes, and they're all going to the nearest market town, and so you just have a system of sort of, I can trust these people or whatever, and away you go. It's all very straightforward.
Right. I'll bear that in mind.
I'm trying to promote it here in the UK as a solution to urban transport for people who don't want to drive, or indeed, as you've been covering, really shouldn't be driving.
Well, quite.
Like
you could be the pin-up poster boy, couldn't you, of hitchhiking?
I am.
You are?
I still do quite. I do lots of it.
Right.
I got a lift the other day through 3 countries in 4 minutes. I was at the point where Luxembourg, Germany and France all combined. I was running late, so I started hitching. I got a lift from France through Germany into Luxembourg, 4 minutes. In 3 countries. So I think I set a record of some sort.
You do? You're really good at this. Now, Simon, I'm back tomorrow morning for Weekend Breakfast. I think we're catching up together tomorrow, aren't we?
Yeah, and I'll be somewhere more salubrious than this.
Go on, tell us where you're going to be.
Split in Croatia.
You can really go off, people. Simon, thank you so much. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you very much. That's Simon Calder, their travel correspondent at The Independent. Of course, here on Talk, we'll keep you up to date with the latest travel news. And, of course, as I say, Simon will join me tomorrow on Weekend Breakfast between 6 o'clock in the morning, that's right, and 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a very long show. And we'll do all of that tomorrow. Keep your messages coming in, please. Are you stuck in traffic? Quite keen to know what the latest is out there. Are you trying to navigate the trains? I have to say, yesterday I went by train up to Runcorn, which is up in the northwest, and I have to say the train was absolutely brilliant. It was 2 hours from London. Incredible. It doesn't happen very often. We were delayed on the way back, but apart from that. Keep your messages coming in, please. I'm asking, after the Supreme Court ruling, how can we be sensitive to trans people? The number 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also message us on X as well at talkTV, or we can talk about driving licence, the visual impairment that people suffer as they get older, the rules around what you have to do, and inform the DVLA. Let me know your thoughts on that as well. And also hitchhiking. Should we have organised hitchhiking a la Simon Calder? Keep all those messages coming in, please. This is Talk.
once she'd got him, once she'd got his prince, she knew she would be very famous throughout the world. She knew she would be very rich because she would make sure that he encouraged her to do that. And I think you're being particularly kind because she is really a spiteful, nasty woman. And she wouldn't, at the Invictus Games, she's ruined that too because she's taken over to do all the speeches. You know, she starts having a kissing game with him so that they get the cameras onto her.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. Lots of messages. Mick in Swinstead. David, they may have lifted the roadworks, but all the infrastructure cones and speed limits are still in place. What? Same old waffle. James. Just to highlight a major problem with the DVLA, my father's driving licence was revoked on the 1st of May 2023 as his diagnosis of Parkinson's is a condition that your GP has to legally inform the DVLA. The letter was received advising him of this on the 14th of June. It wasn't sent first class or needing proof of receipt. He was on holiday in Wales with his car. I got the letter. I then phoned the DVLA, who advised me it was immediate. That's right, and was basically now driving without a licence, road tax and insurance. We had to transport his car and him via a car transporter. Oh, crikey. David, how times have changed when you have a Labour government trying to close down coal mines? Yeah. And a supposedly far-right practical party that wants to keep them open and use in British industry and keep working class people in employment. I think I know who's going to be on the right side of history. That's Trevor in Harrow. Now, we've got some calls coming in. Let's go to Karen in Bournemouth. Good afternoon.
Hi, David. Happy Easter.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And to you as well. Your thoughts?
I think what's going to happen is that Keir Starmer is going to keep this argument going as long as possible.
What are we talking about? The trans debate? Well, not that it's a debate.
Yeah,
we've had a ruling.
Say again, sorry?
We've had a ruling, obviously, now.
Oh, we have. But you see, there's going to be a lot of people still trying to argue it. He might just try and change the law on a short debate. But the reason he's going to leave it as opaque as possible because it will be anything except talking about the grooming gangs. He's got to keep us away from that. So he will quite happily let this carry on.
That's interesting. And what are your feelings on that? Because, of course, Labour has dropped their plans for these grooming gangs inquiries. This was, the 10th of April. I think there are real concerns here from the government that they don't want to let's just say, antagonise a certain demographic that they rely upon for votes?
I think it's more than that. I think that J.D. Vance was quite right when he said that England could easily become an Islamic state. And Keir Starmer thinks he's going to be the Ayatollah.
That's interesting. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that at all. I think he's right. That's a really interesting call, Karen. Thank you. Louise is on the line from Kent. Good afternoon.
Hi. Yes, about the trans debate, I think everybody are getting a bit upset about this, in the sense that, for starters, maybe some of these trans people would like to think about how some of us women were feeling and how frightened we were.
But to be fair to my caller, who was brilliant...
No, I get that, and I'm just going to explain that.
Oh, yeah, go on.
If you think about it, the people who will actually police this will be the women in the changing rooms themselves who notice this. And frankly, if like this black caller you had, if she came into the changing room having had full surgery, very unlikely that I would ever twig that they were ever not a female. Because, frankly, there are women who look quite masculine. They've got very small breasts, short hair, etc.
Yes.
I don't bother about them. If if a fully transitioned, who'd had surgery, woman came in, I don't think I'd ever realise that they weren't a woman.
Sure.
The problem is when you get a fully intact male coming in looking like they're... And when you think that, they say, OK, well, let them use the disabled. Now, they're shouting and screaming, oh, well, you know, affect our productivity, disabled toilets, maybe on other floors or in other buildings. Well, how do they think disabled people feel and cope?
Yes. I agree totally. But then, as I say, the brilliant caller I had, and I said, if we have safe spaces where you are also protected. So we heard from this lady who then was assaulted in a male changing room. And if we can then protect trans women as well, then that has to be a win-win, doesn't it?
It does. But that's where I think that I don't see any problem with a fully transitioned who's had gender surgery going into a female changing room, because half the women wouldn't even notice, wouldn't know.
But remember, but you can't legislate and say fully transition, can you? That's the problem.
No, but what I'm saying is that if they were changing in a female changing room...
No, I get that.
How many women would know?
Oh, I totally get that. But then you've got trans women with penises in female changing rooms.
Exactly. And women would notice that, and then
I would say so.
They could then complain.
Yeah.
Because they shouldn't be in there. Because also, I would like to, because one of the problems is the worry is for women, that how many of these men are going to, because there's something about nipping this in the bud. Because if we don't, in 5 years' time, when we get more problems in women's changing rooms, because men have had their way that they've cottoned on, that if they pretend they're women, they can then go in and do things they shouldn't be doing. 5, 10 years, we'll be saying, well, how do we get to this position? So it's almost a question. You have to backtrack, stop it in its tracks, and then you work out these things afterwards. How do we support fully transitioned who've had surgery women?
100%. Look, I think the ruling gives us great clarity moving forward. Louise, thanks very much for your call this afternoon. Peter Cardwell, get off your phone.
How are you doing? You all right?
I'm all right. Am I interrupting?
Yeah, it's very rude of you. Yeah,
I know.
No, I'm sending a little tweet out so people know what's coming up on my show.
What is coming up?
Well, lots. We're talking about whether prison guards should be issued with stab vests following that horrendous attack last week in HMP Franklin, which is one of the most dangerous. Yeah, definitely. If they want them. I mean, you know, you have people in Sainsbury's, you have security guards in Sainsbury's with a stab vest. It's not that big a deal. Do you know why they don't have them at the moment? No. Because prisoners might find it too intimidating.
They're in prison.
Yes, thank you. That's meant to be intimidating. We're talking about 2 in 5 teachers assaulted as classroom violence surges. Absolutely horrendous. Also, could the US move